It is now 7 o'clock.
Good evening. We have two meetings tonight. The first will be a public hearing held by the Urbana City Council, and that'll be followed by the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Before we begin the hearing tonight, I wanted to take a moment to recognize that today, on the eve of the inauguration, is a national day of mourning for the over 400,000 people who have lost their lives to COVID-19 since the pandemic began. And today here in Champaign County, we dedicated a memorial to the 102 victims of COVID-19 as of this morning. This memorial is in place at the Unitarian Universalist Church. There are 102 hearts in the ground there, and each of those hearts represents a life lost, many years unlived, and families and friends who are grieving. So I would like to ask us to take a moment of silence to recognize and honor their memories.
Okay. Can everybody?
Thank you. And again, each of those hearts, if you want to look at it on a national scale, represents 4,000 people that we've lost to COVID. All right, we'll move on to the public hearing for the Urbana City Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Here.
Mr. Sachs?
Here.
Ms. Hersey?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Colebrook?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mayor Marlin?
Present. Next up is public input. This is a public hearing. The purpose of the public hearing is to provide an opportunity for the public to provide input and comments regarding a proposed amendment to the City of Urbana and Urbana Home Consortium Consolidated Plan Annual Action Plan for fiscal year 2019-20. Notice of the public hearing was faxed or emailed to the media, emailed to various social service agencies and citizens, and placed on the City of Urbana website on January 13th, 2021. I now declare the public hearing open. If anyone desires to express their views regarding the proposed amendment to the annual action plan, please raise your hand and be recognized. Your written comments via email are also welcome. All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, well, thank you. Since there are no comments, I now declare the public hearing closed. And with no further business before this hearing, we are adjourned. And we'll begin immediately with the City Council Committee of the Whole, which will be chaired by Sharice Hersey.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Here.
Mr. Sachs?
Here.
Ms. Hersey?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Roberts?
Here.
Mr. Colebrook?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mayor Marlin?
Present.
Okay, thank you. Before we start, I'd like to say that the city takes public comment via email, written format, and verbally. Public comments are limited to 4 minutes per person. Public input will total no more than 1 hour unless shortened or extended by majority vote of the members present. The meeting chair has the option of giving priority to speakers who wish to comment on specific agenda items upon which a vote will be taken. We ask that you address your comments to the public body as a whole and maintain respect for the process and respect for members of the council, city staff, and general public. If you have something that you would like to send through email, please feel free to do that. Upon that, I would like to call on the approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have any motions?
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 4th.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved by Mary Alice and seconded by Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I got a lot of paper here. Is there any discussion? Any changes? Ms. Clark, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, with that done, are there any additions to the agenda or changes? Okay, I would like to, before we go into presentations and then public input, I would like to say something at this time. Last week, my ward was flooded with flyers from No White Guilt. And we were in fact inundated not just through Ellis subdivision, but also going south as far as Beach Street and maybe even as far as by King School. I would like to thank the law enforcement police for coming out as quickly as they did and investigating. I would also like to thank Mayor Marlin for her remarks that she made on the Facebook Ward 3 Warriors page, stating quite plainly that this is not acceptable and it would not be allowed, and they will find no solidarity here. To my ward, I would like to say that this is not new for us. We will be vigilant and watching and taking care of each other and watching each other's backs because of all of this mess that happened in DC. Some people are really feeling that this is okay, and it is not. I just ask that everyone watch yourselves and watch your neighbors as much as possible. This is not something that's going to go away quickly. This is something that will probably be around for a very long time, and we need to be cognizant of that and aware. The investigations, I'm sure that will probably be ongoing if this continues, have been handled, I think, well by our police force and our detectives. And I expect that this will be something that will also be in continuation as long as we feel that we are under threat. And I have taken it as a threat, and I will not be intimidated in my community or in my home, on my block. And I think I can speak for everyone in Ward 3 when I say that. We will not be intimidated. So with that said, I just wanted to move on from there. The next thing will be an announcement also from Mayor Marlin. All right, as far as we're starting our you had something that you want to say.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up on Sharice's comments. In addition to public statements regarding this absolutely unacceptable behavior, the city of Urbana has mailed messages to residents in the Dr. Ellis subdivision, and the messages read, these are postcards that should arrive in their mailboxes tomorrow or the next day. Dear friends, last week your neighborhood found hateful messages in driveways and yards. Today, I want you to have this message of love and concern from your community. Please know that we stand with you against racist attempts to divide our city. We condemn these hurtful actions and will do our best to determine who's responsible. Sincerely, Mayor Diane Marlin, on behalf of the people of Urbana.
Thank you, Mayor Marlin. And let me see. We're going to have a presentation regarding the audit. Okay.
Yes, and we have Shannon Clark here, who is our new Deputy Finance Director, and she's going to get this started.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to introduce Joe Lightcap, who is a partner with our audit firm, Baker Tilly. Before Joe goes over the FY20 audit reports, I briefly wanted to mention a few items. First, the audit reports are prepared on a different basis of accounting than the reports you're used to receiving from us throughout the year. The Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, also known as the CAFR, is prepared on the modified accrual basis of accounting per accounting standards, while the budgeting and quarterly reports that you receive from us are on the CAS basis of accounting. Also, there are some differences in the way funds are presented. For example, the general fund in the CAFR includes other small funds for presentation purposes. For your reference, all reports being presented today are available on the city's website. And then lastly, I'd just like to thank the accounting and auditing teams for all of their hard work. Both teams found ways to work effectively and remotely, given the challenging year due to COVID. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Joe.
Hi, everyone. First off, I'd like to echo those sentiments on the cooperation and how the audit went in the remote environment. The city's always very good. The accounting staff is always very good at getting us information. And this year definitely did not make that any easier, but the city performed up to task as always. I will be going over three reports tonight at a very high level. So if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time and ask them, and I'll take a pause between the first two reports. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the pages of the financial statements and the audit results letter that I'll be going over. You should be able to see right now the beginning of the comprehensive annual financial report. And as the name suggests, it's a more comprehensive document. And it's more comprehensive than what's required by accounting standards. So there's a lot of additional information that isn't required, but it's very useful to the users in the financial statements and to City Council. Mainly there's a narrative at the beginning that talks about some policies of the city, as well as some good 10-year trend information in the back. The first part of the financial statements I want to go over is the opinion. Once again, we have issued a clean or unmodified opinion on the city's financial statements. This is the highest level of assurance you can get from your outside auditors. States that everything's reasonable in all material respects and can be reasonably relied upon by an outside user of the financial statements. There were no new accounting standards or auditing standards adopted during the year that were important enough to really change your perspective when you look at this compared to the prior year. On the next thing I want to just briefly go over is to point you in the direction of the management's discussion and analysis. It starts on page 4. This is a high-level overview of the financial statements written by the finance staff and their high-level overview of results compared to the prior year and kind of why that happened. It's a real, and it also discusses the financial statements that are included. It's a really easy to read part of this document, whereas some of the other parts can get a little deep into the different accounting policies. This is a good high-level overview of the year. The next part I want to go to is page 15. This is the statement in net position. So as was mentioned, these financial statements are on a different basis of accounting. We'll go over the modified accrual ones in a second, but there's also full accrual financial statements in the beginning of the report and the statement in net position. This is all of the funds combined into two different columns, also shows the library as well. These also have all of the assets and liabilities of the city. So all of the capital assets and all of the long-term debt, including pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities. The statement of activities on pages 16 and 17 is your income statement on the full accrual basis of accounting. And you can see on page 17, the change in net position, the governmental activities. Net position decreased by about $2 million. The business type activities went down about $400,000. We'll see in a little bit the modified accrual statements and how the fund balances went up. The change from that one basis accounting on the fund level to all of the funds as a whole is mainly due to the inclusion of the net pension liabilities of the city on these full accrual statements. So here, I want to go to a little more of what you see. Obviously, as mentioned, there was differences in the basis of accounting and some of the grouping of the funds to combine what we have here as the general fund. But you can see as the total fund balance increased by about $1.7 million from the prior year, and the general fund was up about $1.4 million, which is about 6.5 months of expenditures. After these statements, there's some information on the proprietary funds and the pensions as well. And then the notes to the financial statements goes into a lot of great detail on the accounting policies and changes from prior year on different accounts. But I wanted to kind of jump over that information and direct you to page 92, which is the pension statements for IMRF. The 92 starts IMRF, but then we'll go into the police pension and the fire pension. We can see on IMRF on the right column, the net pension liability, which is like 2/3 of the way down the page, was about $4 million compared to about $10.7 million in the prior year. A large reason for that is net investment income. And this net investment income is measured as of 12/31/19, which is 6 months prior to the fiscal year end. When we go into police and fire, starting with police, you can see that number was not as big of an increase compared to the prior year, and that's because it's measured as of June 30th. So just some things to think of. We have similar schedules measured differently because one is IMRF measured for the fund as a whole, and then you get drilled into more detail with the police and fire pensions held at the city. The net pension liability for police increased to $26.8 million, and fire is at about $12 million. As I mentioned, there's some additional trend information in the financial statements and a lot of good budget to actual information. So if you want to compare what the council adopted for the budget and compare it to actual results, you can do that as well in this document. With that, I guess I would open it up for any questions on the comprehensive annual financial report before I move into the audit results letter. Okay. So I'll go into the audit results letter if there's no question.
I had a question.
Okay.
I was waiting to be recognized by the chair. You're on mute, Sharice.
Go ahead, Jared.
Thanks. Joe, that was one of the things I remember from our last audit. And can you just provide a quick reminder for council and the public where the easiest place to look at, our budgetary decision versus our budgetary result in the report?
Yep. So for the The general fund, there's two different spots. There's page 88 has kind of more of a detailed schedule of revenues and expenditures. Maybe no, sorry, that's the one. So page 88 and page 9 have the general fund budget to actual results. You can see revenues were about $1.8 million under budget, but then on the expenditure side, you were quite a bit more. You were about $3 million under budget. So the excess was about $1.5 million, and whereas you budgeted for a $300,000 increase. And then you get into your other financing sources and uses, which are transfers in and out, and that you can see how that results into the $1.4 million increase in fund balance for the general fund. There are additional, the other major special revenue funds and other funds have budget to actual schedules after the fire pension schedules. There's combining schedules for your different non-major funds. And then starting on page 112, there's additional budget to actual schedules.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Any other questions? Okay, Joe, I guess you can move on to the next thing.
I think I did see a question.
Oh, Dennis. Okay. You're on mute, Dennis.
Okay, there I go. Thanks. Earlier in the report on page 10, the last paragraph, you talk about it's called current year impacts. And it says that the government activities experienced an increase in expenses of 1.4 million from 47.4 million to 43.3. And I'm wondering if those numbers are reversed. If we're having an increase, it wouldn't go from 47 million to 43 million if it was an increase. Am I reading that wrong?
Yeah, you are correct. The expenses this year were 47.4. I can go, sorry for the scrolling.
And that was page 10.
Yeah, I want to show it because I want to show you here. I can make this a little bit bigger. Here's the expenses over the past 10 years in the back. You can see in 2019, they were 44 million. So for governmental activities, they were 43.3. So they did increase from the prior year. So the language is reversed a little bit.
Is reversed, yeah. Okay, that's just something I caught. Then one more question. Our central TIF shows a deficit this current year, the funds of $82,000. Is there any background on what the expense was that created the deficit in the central TIF district? Maybe it's not something you actually know.
I would have to either defer to the finance staff, or we'd have to get back to you after the meeting.
All right.
Yeah, I'm gonna say we think that was just a timing issue, but we can dig into that a little bit more and get back to you.
I realize the TIF hasn't probably grown very high, but I was just sort of wondering about how it could be a deficit so soon. Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Grace, I have a question about pensions.
Okay.
So if you wouldn't mind going back to the FOP and the two pension pages. So if I'm reading this correctly right now, the net liability is not the net pension liability. Yeah, the city's net pension liability, that's the amount of money that we don't have saved. Is that just a quick summary of what that means, right?
Correct.
So we're in negative in these amounts. And I know that we've always had conversations about the pensions in terms of who manages the funds. Some groups are better at managing the funds than other groups, or maybe I should say they're more fortunate in the choices that they make. And that the fire department generally is better funded based on the decisions of the fire pension board than the police pension board. So is that one of the things that we're seeing here? Is that continuing here? Or are there larger issues?
I would have to go, but I don't have the rate of returns over the, for fiscal year 20. But just looking at it, there is it's hard. The fire pension did result in additional investment income, but they also had a higher net position to start with. So that would generate additional income.
Yeah.
Have rate of returns.
I might be able to help. I can get you those returns tomorrow. I don't have them handy in the conference room with me. But another thing I think that you're seeing is that, so this is, as Joe mentioned, measured at June 30, and investment returns in the first half of the calendar year were not great with the start of the pandemic. And so also we've seen a significant rebound in both pension funds. And also I'll note that issue of investment decisions is going to disappear soon with the consolidation of police and fire pension funds downstate in Illinois. And so we expect that that's going to happen sometime in the next year. Both of these funds will get absorbed into the larger state, downstate police and fire funds.
All right. And so right now, at the moment, we have 19% for the fire department, which is not funded, and we have more like 35% for the police. Is that right? No, 40% for the police. And then what is it for the just the employees that are not in either?
MRF is about 90.
Okay,
94%.
so we're 5%,
Yep.
5 or 6%. Yeah, there's a huge difference there. All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from City Council? I'm trying to see. Okay, not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Lightcamp. I suppose we're finished, or are you?
I do have another report that I can go over.
Okay, please do. Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
So that's okay. So this is the reporting and insights letter from the 2020 audit. This is the non-financial highlights. It's a rebranded version of what we presented to council in the past that was called the communication to management and those charged with governance. It really satisfies the same auditing standards that we're required to report on. Just looks a little different and maybe a little easier to kind of follow. It does, as I mentioned, satisfy a few different standards, and you can see in the table of contents the things that it does satisfy. The audit objectives, our responsibilities compared to management's responsibilities, significant changes in the audit plan, and a little bit about our audit approach and results. And then some additional information kind of ancillary to that. I do want to start on page 2, which is the executive summary. I think this is important because this is the first year where we're presenting our contact information more clearly. I always come to council and I bring up that we work with management to do the audit, but we work for council. If you ever have any questions, concerns with the audit, we're here to talk to you and see what we can do during our audit or just answer any questions. So here is my actual contact information should you need it. And then on the last 2 pages of this report, it does list out a few different things for you to consider in potential discussion topics. On page 11, I point this out, the significant risks of material misstatement, only because it's new. I don't think this was reported in the past in our reports, especially this cleanly. These are standard significant risk areas in every audit performed, not just local governments, but in corporate audits as well. So there's 2 areas: management override of controls and improper revenue recognition due to fraud. we are required to look at those 2 areas in every audit we perform. So it describes a little bit of about our testing approach and our conclusions, and the conclusions are positive. So I'd like to point that out because it's new. I'm in a little bit different. It could be concerning if not put into the proper context. On page 12, the final kind of piece I wanted to go into detail is the internal control matters section of this report. So when we come in to do our planning procedures for the audit, we look at internal controls to determine the nature, timing, and extent of our procedures, not to necessarily provide you with an opinion on internal controls, but if there's something that we see that we feel the board or the council should know about, we put that in this letter. There is one comment reported concerning financial statement close process and really our involvement in the preparation of the comprehensive annual financial report. This is a comment that you've seen in the past, and it's fairly common within the state and local government arena. I do like to point out also that in the prior year there was an additional comment around payroll segregation of duties, and I think when we talked last year, we talked about that comment potentially going away with improvements done with the GL system and a few additional internal controls. I'm happy to present that that comment has been removed for fiscal year 20. So while we talked about having to test it when we came out for the fiscal year 20 audit, that is what we saw. That control has still been in place. So that's always good to see. The rest of this letter is very, I would say, boilerplate, which I think from your perspective is a good thing. If there weren't any disagreements or unusual transactions, we would report those. And you can see throughout the letter that there's none reported in a lot of those, all of those areas. So it's definitely good to see. And it just talks to the skill and the talent of the finance office. And this letter in particular, the internal control matters, is designed to point out things that we see, like room for improvement. It doesn't obviously list out all the good things that the finance staff and the rest of the city is doing. So I do like to point that out, that this is geared towards that and not necessarily geared to be a positive letter. So with that, I would open it up to any questions on the audit results communication.
Questions? I'm trying to look here. Okay, I don't see any questions. Does anyone want to have a comment or anything? Okay, are you finished, Mr. Lightcap?
I am finished.
Okay, thank you very much for your information, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night.
You too. Okay, next we will have public input. Let me go through here and see who's. And I will start with Christopher Hansen.
Cherise, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Mr. Hansen.
Thank you. This is Christopher Hansen. I wanted to start by commenting on the idea brought forward by Jared Miller and Dennis Roberts to add some opportunity for the council members to issue comments about concerns in their wards or responses to public input. That seems to me the best idea that the council has brought forward in the last year. So and really, I want to point out what you're doing is essentially restoring things back to what they were before the mayor broke them with the new rules. So it's interesting. What I really want to talk about is the way the city handles issues of accountability in our CPRB and especially the HRC, which is the last item on your agenda there. I have a letter here from Carol Mitten scheduling a CPRB hearing, appeals hearing, and we're still not following the ordinance. I mean, the ordinance indicates a specific notice time for scheduling these hearings with all the interested parties. I think you guys probably recall this came up before, and we're still not in compliance. So I don't understand why this is so difficult. And what's infuriating is that in every instance possible, the posture of the city is to obstruct access by residents to a particular process, and to always excuse misconduct or refusal to comply with the established processes by the city and city staff. So the posture should actually be the opposite of that. It should always be in the direction of including the residents of Urbana. And this last item on your agenda here, you're going to discuss something that is opposite to basically what every member of the public I've talked to is interested in, and you're going to try to, or what Carol Mitten is going to propose at least, is to excuse and exempt the city of Urbana itself from our own anti-discrimination laws, from our own human rights laws. And the reason this is happening is because the city just doesn't want to have accountability. In every instance where some issue of misconduct or accountability has come up with city staff, elected officials, the Urbana Police Department, the response at every moment is to, instead of deal with the misconduct that actually exists, the response is for the city to try to contort itself in a way where it can just ignore the fact that there was misconduct, or refuse a resident's complaint, or somehow just twist itself out of the process. And this is what invited the hours and hours and hours and hours of angry input from the public over the past 10 months or so. We had this Alea Lewis incident, and the city and largely the council members kind of refused to acknowledge that anything went wrong. And you won't accept, police complaints in regards to that because, you're saying there's an ongoing criminal issue. And basically what you earned yourself, what you whittled it down to, is the only tool that you left remaining for Urbana residents to issue their grievances is to show up at your meetings en masse and just give it to you for hours and hours, week after week. And now you're doing the same thing with the Human Relations Commissioner. That's what you're going to be pressured into doing, is to remove the city itself from its own anti-discrimination laws. And I sure hope you guys are prepared to explain, if you are going to push this forward, I sure hope you guys are willing to explain why everyone else in Urbana should have to comply with our anti-discrimination laws, but for some reason, the city, its employees, its staff, its agents, and everyone related to the city is expected that they shouldn't have to comply with those anti-discrimination laws. It's the wrong thing to do. You shouldn't do it. If you see a process problem, a mechanism problem, then change the process. Don't just exempt the city. Thanks.
Sharice, you're muted.
Hello. Did you call me?
Julie Watkins. Yes.
Yes, hello. And you can hear me, good. I'm Julie Watkins. I've lived in Ward 5 since 1976, and I'm appreciating this opportunity to speak. This input is about the UPD use of force policy. I want to agree with what other public comment has said at previous meetings, and I will be listening for council reply comments. I do believe it is reasonable to insist for no escalation of force unless it really isn't. If the person shows a weapon and is attacking, yes, then it isn't an escalation to react to that. But words are not a threat. Walking away is not a threat. That's passive. It's reasonable for us to say no use of force in those cases. It's reasonable for us to object when we see a video showing UPD using force, showing UPD escalating against words, escalating against walking away. You don't use force, use persuasion. Have a talk and let them go. If UPD doesn't incorporate what ACLU and other groups have put input in, how to close the loopholes, Danielle Chenoweth pointed out language in the then proposed policy would facilitate implicit bias, but we want to remove that. So I hope the policy's been revised, because really what you permit, you're promoting. Please don't tell me through policies, please don't tell Urbana residents through these policies that you're okay with perpetuating the implicit bias that's already been proven. Don't tell us that it's okay with you that police do what they do with a little bit of pretty up on the edges. You've already been evasive on many matters. There's other public input has given examples. That doesn't help community trust. I want you to use these policies to try to regain that trust. When you, in essence, try to call an apple a desk, that doesn't help with trust. So I'm hoping you will please write something with proper input that the ACLU and others who have studied this problem can endorse. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watkins. Okay, next we have Tracy Chung.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Hi, I'm Tracy Chong from Urbana. So tonight you will be discussing an ordinance amending Urbana City Code Chapter 12 to exempt the city of Urbana from being under the jurisdiction of the Human Rights Commission. I'm not sure how much information you have been given by city staff or how honest the information is. Reading the memorandum issued by City Administrator Carol Mitten to Mayor Marlin on January 14th, it does not seem very honest. In her introduction, Carol Mitten writes that the implication in the current ordinance is that the city is not subject to HRC's jurisdiction. This is not accurate. There are several sections in the code that do strongly imply that the city is subject to jurisdiction, and the fact that we have to add language that explicitly exempts the city tells us so. At the November 10th special HRC hearing, it was a unanimous decision by the panel that the city's hiring practices do need to comply with the Human Rights Ordinance with regards to discriminatory hiring practices. The panel also agreed that based on the current ordinance, the HRC does have jurisdiction over the hiring practices of the city. What's alarming is that Carol Mitten wrote a letter to the HRC saying that the city is disregarding the outcome of the hearing, and moving forward, the HRC has no jurisdiction to ensure the city follows its own anti-discrimination policies. She then says that the outcome of the hearing is void because of a technicality. The proposed ordinance suggests including a statement saying that the city intends to follow its human rights ordinance. However, after the November 10th hearing, Carol Mitten wrote in her letter to HRC members that the city is going to continue disregarding the ordinance. These actions do not inspire any trust that a simple statement will hold the city accountable to its own ordinances. In addition, the city has shown from past actions that it can choose to enforce or not enforce its ordinances at whim. In today's memorandum, Carol Mitten gives reasons such as conflicts of interest and the difficulty of the city prosecuting itself. However, I urge City Council members to not take these reasons at face value and to look for other solutions. For example, the city could use outside counsel to defend itself should the city be a respondent in a hearing. It's also worrying that the city seems to hold influence over a commission that is supposed to be independent, like the Human Rights Commission. HRC members have been discussing this issue since last June, and from listening to all their meetings, it seemed to me like several board members who were tasked with reviewing the ordinance agreed that there are sections in the Human Rights Ordinance that conveys the intent of the ordinance to have jurisdiction over the city. However, after receiving Carol Mitten's letter essentially voiding the results of the November 10th hearing, it seemed like it was actually pretty disturbing to hear. The board members suddenly flip-flopped, and it sounded like they were afraid of forming an opinion. And they're now tasking you, council members, with making the decision. I think this is, I felt very disturbed hearing that. And I hope that you will weigh this decision and not just follow what city staff is telling you to do. Thank you.
Sharice, you're muted.
I hit the button. I thought I unmuted. Sorry, you guys. I'm sorry. Deborah, are you there?
Thanks, Trace. Yeah, I'm here. My name is Deborah Liu. I'm a resident of Urbana Ward 3 and candidate for City Council in Ward 3. I want to make the City Council and the public aware that on January 13th of this year, just a week ago, Urbana resident Tonya Barrett was struck and killed by a driver on Main Street. The driver's excuse was that they didn't see her, and they have not been issued any citations. I've been deeply disappointed by the ineffectual and timid actions of this council in many respects, but today I'm just going to focus on traffic safety. I want to be extremely clear. Bad road design killed Tonya Barrett, and the city bears the responsibility for bad roads. It is completely possible to design roads that protect pedestrians and vulnerable road users from cars, but the city has failed to do so. Furthermore, when traffic deaths and serious injuries occur, the city consciously decides to bury its head in the sand. When Shelley Taylor was struck and killed in broad daylight in downtown Urbana by an unimpaired driver whose only defense was that he didn't see her, this council hired a consulting firm to tell you what you wanted to hear and say that the design of the intersection was safe. In your head, you're thinking, oh, this was a tragedy, but it was an accident. In your head, you're thinking that this was unavoidable. In your head, you're thinking that deaths and serious injuries are simply the cost of getting around. I can't emphasize to you how wrong this is. This city council adopted Vision Zero and pledged to make our roads safe for all users under the idea that 0 traffic deaths are acceptable. I can tell you, you're already at 1 for this year. The city bears the responsibility for the completely avoidable death in a Urbana resident, and this council bears the responsibility of every traffic death that occurs. I hope this keeps you awake at night. I hope you lie awake and stare at the ceiling, thinking about the children and the mothers and the fathers and the grandparents and friends whose lives and health have been taken from them brutally and violently because this council failed them and decided that their safety was insufficiently important. I also want to make the public aware that there is a group in Champaign County that seeks for support and advocacy for victims of traffic violence. If you feel that you have been affected by the unacceptable and terrible way that the cities in Champaign County approach traffic safety, please reach out for support and find others that are in the same situation. We are Champaign County Families for Safe Streets. Again, that is Champaign County Families for Safe Streets. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And next, this is why I keep, okay. Minnie Pearson.
My hand was down, but I will speak. I know that I'm Minnie Pearson, NAACP president. I want to inform the public that there have been letters going around that says that there are things happening due to racism and threats to African-American men and boys and people. I want you to know that that did not come from the NAACP. It is a host. There are people out there that would further divide us. So that is not true. And we will be meeting with the mayor tomorrow at 2 o'clock to discuss the ACLU and the NAACP equally will be meeting to talk about the reforms of the draft for the police. So we will talk a little bit later, but just to know that we are working on a meeting tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pearson. Next, we have Megan McDonald.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Dear Urbana City Council, my name is Megan McDonald. My pronouns are she, they, and I am a resident of Ward 5. Really quickly, I just want to say that people ask if you can hear them because this is a virtual meeting with multiple avenues for error. So clarifying this helps with technical difficulties and any citizens with disabilities. So please keep this in mind when people ask you if you can hear them and respond accordingly. I also wanted to mention really quickly that I, and I'm sure other members of the public, appreciate that explanation of the public hearing public input section earlier. And I believe that's why you probably didn't have any hands raised, because there was no room for confusion, which is great and concise for everyone. So I'd like to think this is maybe in response to something I brought up a couple weeks ago about trying to be as transparent as possible. So thanks for listening in that regard. I see that we are discussing budget amendments tonight in regards to a few different sections and purposes of government. I'd really appreciate if at some point we could go back to Mayor Marlin's comment from July and about being all for reallocating funds and seriously talk about amending the $11 million in the police budget. Those $11 million could be used to keep our community safe in other ways. I think that money could be used in multitude of different ways, but one that seems applicable tonight is the idea that we could use some of that money to give access to the University of Illinois saliva-based testing. I'm still unclear of why we are not doing that. Regardless of how difficult or costly it is, I believe it would be worth it. On top of the police funds, we have over $300,000 in funds to assist with COVID-related impacts. Using those funds to make sure everyone is housed in Urbana is a great effort. That no one is out in the street in this pandemic and the cold should be a huge priority in Urbana. I also think the suggestion mentioned in the amendment to use the funds to help businesses retain their low-income employees is a good idea. And then we wouldn't feel the need to push for people to go eat indoors when it's really not safe to do so. The only reason we're able to do so is because there's room in the hospitals, not because the virus has gone away or that everyone is anywhere close to being vaccinated. Anyways, back to the police, and another great comment by Chris that was emailed to you all, and I think the public should be aware of. So I'm going to read that really quickly. Chris emailed you and all of the Urbana primary election candidates and said that I think it would be appropriate for the mayor and the council to explain their intentions to the public and the candidates in regards to the city of Urbana and the Fraternal Order of Police contract. It is our understanding that the city would need to give notice by April 1st that they intend to modify the agreement, and negotiations must begin by May 1st. However, after the general election on April 6th, the city council will experience a turnover in leadership on May 3rd. My understanding from Chris's understanding from a conversation with the mayor is that the notice and negotiations may have already begun. If this is the case, I do not believe the public is being made aware of the process. I think it should be made clear that it's the intent of the sitting mayor and the council to initiate and complete the contract negotiation before the turnover in city leadership. If that's the intent, what options will you leave in the new contract for new leadership to make changes that are more reflective of the interests of today's voters? Will the newly elected Urbana officials need to wait a year or more before pursuing substantive police reform? So I thought that was important to bring up. You should probably address that. Also hope you don't rush the use of force policy, especially how much disapproval you receive from the public, the NAACP, and the ACLU. The police don't need that grant money by the end of the month. The citizens of Urbana deserve a thorough and thoughtful use of force policy to have as many protections as possible against the police. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. Next is Grace Wilkin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Grace Wilkin. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a resident and candidate in Urbana Ward 6. There's so many issues, and I encourage that you please listen to the public, to the people of Urbana tonight, and all of the nights when you're meeting, and work towards the best interest of the people and our community. Just a few things I wanted to comment on of agenda items tonight. We're in support of the gender neutral and gender inclusive language in city documents. And I think that reallocating your travel money for that is a very appropriate and honest use of funds. On the human rights hearing and non-discrimination, I think that the city needs to be held to its own standards, and also that you need to look into the integrity of this process. The city attorney was the presiding officer while also defending the city in the HRC hearing. And I really encourage you to not take that at face value and please look into that issue. The criminal justice system is a vicious cycle, and people need access to basic human rights like housing and employment. Urbana has been much more progressive, even in our local community compared to Champaign, on not discriminating based on criminal record. And I think that it's really important that the city upholds its own standards. This is a really important issue, and please do not take this lightly. Also, with the budget amendments proposed, there's a lot of details, a lot of numbers. I looked at it, not all in detail. And overall, I just encourage you to think about our budgeting and what's actually benefiting the people of Urbana whom you serve and represent. It's important that COVID relief money goes to help those most vulnerable. I know that there's some money in there allocated to low-income assistance, but please compare the numbers, like how much money is being spent just within the city staff versus all of the low-income members of our community. So please compare those numbers and think about how it balances out. Again, please listen to all the other members of the public and the wonderful points that they bring up and the really valuable input that they have to offer. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace Wilkin. Okay, next is hockey.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, my name is Haki. Well, my government name is Drake, but my name is Haki as well. Resident of Champaign, recent graduate of the University of Illinois. I just got off Champaign City Council's public comment meeting, and I basically just want to relay the same information, maybe in a little less aggressive, because the speaker before me tried I didn't get their name, but I did remember the pronouns, her, she, her, in terms of the progressive ideas and the progressive legislation that Urbana has compared to Champaign. So Urbana, let's speak for real here. There are two fights there are two fights to racism. There is a subjective fight and there's an objective. We have to fight the anti-intellectualism that has become a part of the fascist ideas of the right, spreading conspiracy theories instead of awarding and rewarding and pushing intellectualism. Notice that I did not say academia, as my intellectualism has actually come before coming to a predominantly white institution. So there are books out there. There is real time to get politically educated. Subjective measurement is the ideologies, the theology, the anthropology of it all, the thinking and the consciousness of the people, the spirits of the people. The objective measurement is understanding reparations are needed. The defunding of the police and even to the abolishment of police is needed in terms of resource allocation, where that exploitation and historical disfranchisement, those are objective measurements. So because Urbana has this sort of kind of aura or front face type of feeling where it's a little bit more progressive than Champaign, show that you're more progressive than Champaign. And let's talk about the Richie Turner law. Let's talk about actual legislation so that we can remove officers from domestic violence situations and only based off level 1, level 2, level 3. There are certain levels to this. We cannot just simply replace a system with another system of oppression, another system of settler colonialism. So let's talk about legislation that the community has we're currently writing it up and we will be presenting to you all. I expect Urbana, and again, I thank Brother Pep, I thank Lamar Peppers, and for starting the dialogue that is needed to actively address the issues in Urbana. I'm here to also pledge support for Megan Mcdonald, Andy Ma. There are other ones, so I can use Jerry, shout out. And again, I know these people. They've been out here in the streets. I ask that you all too, if you are to seek re-election and acceptance by the people, I expect to see you all more in the streets with the people, not at Blue Lives Matters protests or Back to Blue protests. Here's another objective measurement and subjectivity at the same time, because it speaks to the dire situation at which we are in. any officer that flew, not attended, but flew to DC around January 5th or January 6th must be removed from the Urbana Police Department because of the subjectivity of the dire situation of racism, which is because of the ideology. The ideology is so embedded with the system, the objectivity, the objective measurement. We must attack both, but understand that there are two battles that we must face. Thank you.
Thank you, Haki. And our last person that I see up is London Grant.
My apologies. My name's Rita Connerly.
Oh.
Resident in Champaign. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I do apologize. It's been a long day, a long week. I'm very exhausted. Didn't come well prepared tonight. I just want to echo the previous speakers before me, and I applaud them for coming week to week to express their concerns regarding Urbana's government. Respect people's pronouns, plain and simple. I don't think it's that hard. I think you want people to respect you and your pronouns, whatever they may be. So just respect people's pronouns and let's amend some of our, things to reflect that. Additionally, the city's rules should apply to city staff. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. So, I mean, let's play fair and let's not try to not apply our rules to our staff. Additionally, I think you should amend to extend the negotiations with the Urbana Police and the FOP. I mean, it's not that hard, 1 month. And so until the elections are done, I think that should be something to consider. But I think more than anything, I want to hear from the city, from our elected officials currently, as it relates to what you have to say regarding public comment. I thank Chris Hansen from week to week coming with the facts and presenting them and giving them to the public because our citizens need to be aware. Tracy Chong each week coming again with facts. I thank Megan Mcdonald for advocating. Please vote for her. She's in Ward 5. Each and every speaker that we have, rest in peace to the lady that was hit in Urbana. And thank you for Deborah for noting that. These are things that we need to pay attention to. These are things that need to be noted from week to week as they occur. These are traumas that are affecting our community. Without addressing the traumas of the people, we are not going to be better as a community. I don't understand how difficult that is. And you can only be empathetic. I understand that, but we need to sympathize with others. And for a moment, just place your shoes into their feet, your feet into their shoes. I'm sorry. I'm very disheartened, but again, I want to hear from you all. Oftentimes we don't hear from you. So please tonight, address some of the public comments that were given. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Next is Justin Hendricks.
Can you hear me?
Yes. I thought I had you. Are you unmuted?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you again.
All right. Hello, my name is Justin Michael Hendricks, Parkland College student. I identify as he, him, his, community engineer, creative hidden homeboy, writing candidate for District 3 in Champaign this coming election season. I just want to just be reminded, we just celebrated Martin Luther King, that he did state that he must confess that the dream that he had that day was turned into a nightmare. So that means that we must make things better as we're moving forward. Police at this time must be evaluated more than ever, especially what we have seen with the privileges of certain counterparts that aren't of my community, as I see that they can do certain things that we aren't afforded to do in the sense of protest, in the sense of standing against injustices for Black and brown bodies, especially Black people, such as Aaliyah Lewis. Let's drop the charges. Just want that to be said. Megan, for Ward 5, I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing on behalf of Ward 5, and just watching you do the work before even coming into this is just extraordinary to see, and I can't wait to see even more. Shout out also to Grace and everyone else running in the campaigns coming up for the election seasons. For the one who wrote the letter that I read concerning the HR and Urbana, if Jim Crow wasn't gender neutral, then I'll just say Jane Crow. To have read such messaging, literally allowing racial bias to take place in protecting people's systemic positions is very detrimental to the society, and one who thinks that such must step down. It sounds much like a Champagne home rule that was used in the 1970s to save white fear for the refrain of white flight. Honestly, to have witnessed the uprising of the city, an outcry in support of victims from police violence to racial brutality and securing homelessness to a food desert, it's truly sadly to know that even still legislation or initiatives aren't created quickly to provide access, but not so quickly on the acting of a police use force policy, because we need to have information to digest before councils make such quick decisions. Thank you all for stepping up and taking the appropriate decisions for inclusion with gender and language. As Rita said previously, it's not that hard to respect people's pronouns and how they like to be identified and respected in authenticity. People can't be in positions if they're a disservice to people for personal protections. Chris and Tracy, keep giving the information and spreading the facts. Let's be mindful of our bikers. I send condolences. Lastly, please donate to the Hidden Homeboy Community Closet located at 202 South Broadway, home of the IMC. I look forward to working with the city of Urbana and supplying pantries and accessible resources to our most vulnerable populations, including Latin families and Ivanhoe communities and such more. Thank you all. Take care and good night.
Thank you, Justin. This is a phone call ending 421.
That's just a staff member getting ready for a staff presentation later, Sharice.
Oh, okay. I think that's it.
Minnie Pearson has raised a hand.
Well, she spoke earlier.
Okay.
No, Miss Pearson? Miss Pearson?
Ignore it. My cursor just moved around. Don't worry about it. I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so seeing no more hands up right now, I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is a staff report. We have a staff report.
Sharice, I'll just introduce. We have a couple of staff members who are going to give reports tonight. We're going to start with Sheila Dodd, and then we'll go to Stephanie McMahon, and they're going to give an update on some of the grant money that we have been awarding. And then I believe Lori or Lori is going to give a little update on some activity that has been going on at the Landmark Hotel for people who had questions, because Dennis had sent us a note about that. So that's the lineup. And then I think the mayor probably has something as well.
Okay, thank you. Who's first? Who's on first?
This is Sheila. I'll go first.
Okay, Sheila.
Last spring, we received notice from HUD through the CARES 1 funding that the city was awarded $294,966 to prevent, prepare, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. In June, council approved allocating funds to housing assistance and as well as small businesses. We put out applications and the end of June and the end of July, evaluated those with a team of economic development staff, small business development center, Urbana staff to prioritize who met the guidelines and who had completed applications. The program was limited to agencies who had 15 or fewer full-time employees. A total of 37 applications were received and 27 grants were awarded, totaling about $250,000, of which we've dispersed $225,000. The funds have been used for rent, equipment, inventory, supplies, And through that program, we've gotten a couple of positive feedbacks I wanted to share with you. The Ashar African Market was one of the recipients, and they said that they were excited to receive this immense support and were committed to continuing their business in the city of Urbana and to ultimately serve the people. So that was really nice. And then we also provided funding to Po' Boys. She said that the grant has truly helped their business. They were closed the entire month of April. Now, given this was before the second shutdown. So she said they were not allowing people to dine in due to safety concerns for their family staffing the community. So they were averaging about half the revenue that they did in the same months in 2019. We deeply appreciate the aid this grant has given us. For the Housing Assistance Program, we launched it in July. It's an open-ended program until funding is exhausted. We announced it through the city's website, through social service agencies, landlord associations, Cunningham Township, just a variety of places. The program required the applicant to be impacted by COVID. They had to be a resident of the city of Urbana and current on their rent or mortgage in March of 2020 to meet, as well as meet the HUD income guidelines. As of the date of this report to you, we'd received 67 applications. And of those, we've funded 20, giving them the full 3 months assistance. We have about, I don't know, let me find my numbers here quickly. We have several that are still in the process that we're waiting for additional numbers from. And then we've had to deny about 50% of the grants. Some of those were due to the fact that they weren't in the city of Urbana, and because this is HUD funds, we have to provide the funding to Urbana residents. And then, so we referred them to either the city of Champaign or the county for assistance because both of them have those. 12 applicants didn't meet the guidelines and we referred to other programs. And then 9 applicants didn't provide complete applications. The application requirements were listed in the application itself, and we would need that information in order to do a complete evaluation and meet HUD guidelines. And so we didn't receive complete applications. We've reached out to those 9 individuals and have reached through phone calls and through email and issuing letters, recognizing that, you know, during the pandemic, we just needed to do a variety of ways to reach out to people because the normal path may not be available to them. We did receive a really nice note I wanted to share with you. This is from a person that's a waitress, and she said, I just want to say thank you for having a program available to people in need, because if it wasn't for this program, I don't honestly know how I was going to be able to pay my rent. I'm only qualified for $113 a week in unemployment. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Sheila. Did you say the rental assistance is still open?
It is. Matter of fact, I was in the office today and I received 7 applications over the weekend. So
okay, on the city's website under the COVID-19 page, that link, it seems to be broken. I was going to look at the application today and I noticed that was broken.
It might be a timing thing, Bill, because I had Bridget posted again today because it had slipped away from the front page. And so she did repost it and it's on the front page again.
Okay. Well, I can send you where the link is broken. I just wondered, I was a little discouraged that only 20 people took advantage of, or was qualified and took advantage of it. And I know when I looked at the application before, it did seem a little foreboding, maybe. I don't know. I didn't look at it real closely, but it just seemed like there were a lot of questions. I assume you've gone through those and, you know, taken out as much as you can. Is there any way to simplify that any further?
Unfortunately, not that I've been able to see, because we have to document to meet HUD guidelines, and that just requires extra steps. We've kind of worked closely with Champaign and the county to try to streamline our process as best as we can. But unfortunately, we just have to have that documentation. We still do. We've funded 20. We still have about 14 or 15 in the process where they're providing additional information, or I'm waiting on their landlord to give me some information. So it is still in the process. And then last week we received notice that the county may receive a direct allocation of funds through this CARES funding that was signed the end of December. And it'll bring a lot of money to Champaign County Regional Plan Commission that'll provide rental assistance. So today, the people that we've had to deny for a variety of reasons, whether they weren't in the city limits or they weren't current on their rent in March, those restrictions seem to be a little looser than mine. So I'm sending letters to those people, encouraging them to reach out to Regional Plan Commission, because that program will allow up to 12 months of rent assistance where mine only offers 3. So we're trying to work together to find the best path for everyone to get them as much funding as we possibly can.
Okay, thanks. I realize that HUD places a lot of restrictions and hurdles, and you need to provide a lot of information for that. But I appreciate the way that you've reached out to try to help people fill out the application too.
Okay, are there any more questions for Sheila? All right, thank you, Sheila. And who's next? Stephanie?
Yes.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to give a brief update on the CURES economic support grant that we administered. I came to you last fall asking that we apply for funding from DCEO to create these grants, and we were awarded $500,000. We worked closely with Champaign and Urbana, or Champaign and Rantoul, and we created a very similar application process. We were all awarded near the same time and rolled out our programs at the same time. Ours have the largest grant at $20,000 max. It was a very quick turnaround because the grant and the funds that were eligible for this grant had to be spent by December 30th. So we received and have awarded 32 applications, 32 awards, totaling $240,000. And remember, these funds went to reimburse businesses for COVID eligible expenses. So everything from plexiglass to PPE. There was a wide variety of receipts that I went through to review these funds and get the money out there to the businesses. So we were working pretty fast and furious to get that done by the deadline. And the businesses were very grateful to working with us and are very anxious to get things open again and be prepared to do that safely. So we do have remaining funds that DCEO wants us to use. We're just waiting for legislation to pass telling us how we can use those funds, if the grant can be extended or changed in any way so that we can expend them to the businesses that need them. So I'm glad to answer any questions you have.
Are there any questions for Stephanie?
Stephanie, you gave us a list at one point. Is that the list of businesses that were helped under this grant?
It could have been. I keep a list of all the businesses that have received even big and PPE funds. So I have a full list of all the businesses in Urbana that have received any type of funding from the start of COVID. And I'll be adding this list of those CURES recipients to that list along with Sheila's grants too. So I'm glad to send out anything you'd like.
That would be great if you could send us. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks.
And next is Lori.
Thank you. I wanted to respond. Dennis had asked for a little bit of information about the activity that he and others have probably seen around the Landmark Hotel. So a few weeks ago, there was a sprinkler issue in the 1982 portion of the hotel. So there has been some water damage. So what you have seen put into dumpsters is wet drywall, wet carpet, wet mattresses, that kind of thing. So they're clearing out the items in the 1982 part of the addition that were that experienced water damage. So that is the extent of the construction or deconstruction at this point.
Okay, thank you so much. I rather imagine that there was probably a problem similar to that, but it's good to get confirmation. I appreciate it very much. Anything we know about actual reconstruction coming up for the developer himself?
Well, I was going to reach out about the first of the year to kind of find out where they were with that schedule, but then the water issue came up, so I'm allowing them the space and the time to resolve that. And then maybe in the next week or so, I'll reach out and see how they're doing on the design work.
Okay, thanks so much.
Are there any more questions for Lori? Okay, thank you, Lori. And we have another one from Stephanie? No, okay, anyone? Mayor Marlin?
Just a couple notes. First of all, I want to thank the grants management staff, the economic development staff, CD, for the tremendous amount of work they did over really the holiday between Christmas and New Year's. They were processing these grants. The state gave them impossible deadlines to meet, and they met them. So I just want to thank everybody for their hard work. They really, really pushed the money, took the money in, and we pushed it out the door as fast as humanly possible to get it into the hands of the people who needed it. So we owe thanks to our staff for that. Just a note on the use of force policy, I wanted to repeat, you heard before, we're have a meeting scheduled tomorrow with representatives from the NAACP and the ACLU to continue the discussion about the use of force policy and to get more into detail on the suggestions and feedback that we got over the last week from public input. We're taking that to heart. I want to let the public know we're going to take the time necessary to get and to create the use of force policy that works for our community. So I want to thank everyone for the input provided there. And COVID update, you all know that we skipped from tier 3 to back up to tier 1. We're still in phase 3, so we do have limited indoor dining, but it's important for people to understand that these metrics are based on hospitalizations or hospital bed availability and positivity rate. And we moved to this tier because we now have the hospital beds available. The virus is as dangerous as ever. And in fact, the new variant is here in Illinois. It's going to be arriving in Champaign-Urbana, and students are coming back as well. So we need, the new variant of this virus is more contagious than the current one. So we still need to maintain masking, distancing, and all the prevention efforts that have gotten us through to this point. And when you have an opportunity to get a vaccination, please do. That's going to be the key to us getting through the pandemic. So again, some indoor dining, some bars, restaurants, or bars if they're have to be serving food, otherwise they cannot be open for just drinking. And then some other indoor activity is allowed as well. So, but again, we ask people to maintain your prevention efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Marlin. Are there any questions for Mayor Marlin? Okay, moving on to our next part of our agenda, which is resolution number 2021-01-001R. A resolution accepting the assistance and firefighters grant program COVID-19 supplemental AFGS funding from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, United States Department of Homeland Security, Fire Department. And I think we have Chief Laus. Chief Laus.
Yes. Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to give you a brief explanation on this. You have the memo in front of you, so I'm going to give you a little bit of the crib notes of that memo. back in May, June area, the county fire departments got together and decided we're going to try to take advantage of the supplemental grant through the Assistance to Firefighters grant process, which helped us to secure some dollars for personal protective equipment. We applied as all the departments were invited to be a part of that. We put all of our figures together and came up with the amount of $207,030 that was requested from FEMA. We were successful in that. The City of Urbana Fire Department's share of that will be $47,823, which 10% is on our shoulders to come up with the dollars for 10% of that amount that we won out of that. The City of Champaign is administering this grant, which we greatly appreciate them doing that, because administering these, as you might know, can be a bit of a headache, but they have decided that they're going to administer it, so all of the records are with them. We submit all of our receipts, and then we get reimbursed after we receive those or submit those receipts. So this is just basically to bring to you to accept this grant.
Okay, questions, Mary Alice?
Thank you for your efforts and all of the people within our county to be providing all of these different grant sources to cover some of these additional expenses. I went through the supplies that had been requested, and the notes that I had made in terms of the City of Urbana was that there were coveralls, N95 masks, reusable eye and face shields, exam gloves, and boot covers. Those are the items that I found that the City of Urbana would be compensated for. Did I miss anything in there, Chief?
No, we do have all of those that we have in that list of purchases. We're focusing big time on the N95 masks and the gowns and gloves because those are the ones that probably are going to give us the highest level of protection. So that's going to be our biggest focus moving forward.
And so is this grant going to be used for previous purchases or purchases in the future?
So these are purchases within a 1-year time, and I think it goes to July 15 of 2021. So that 1-year time period, that window, is when we can submit the receipts for. So from July 15 of 2020 to July 15 of 2021. And I can just pretty well guarantee you we won't have a bit of problem using it all up.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for your work on this.
You betcha. Our pleasure.
Is there anyone else that'd like to ask, Chief Ross? Jarrett?
I didn't, but I was going to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we send resolution number 2021-01-001R, a resolution accepting the assistance to firefighters, a grant program for COVID-19 supplemental AFG-H funding from from FEMA and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, be sent to the City Council with recommendation for approval.
And I'll second that.
Okay. A move by Jared, seconded by Mary Alice. Any discussion? Discussion or questions? Then will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, has been moved and seconded to be moved on to City Council for approval. And I'm trying to mark this. Next, we have resolution number 2021-0-01-002R, a resolution approving an amendment to the City of Urbana Consolidated Plan and Annual Action Plan for year 2019-2020. And this is community development. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to this?
This is Sheila. I'll speak to it.
Okay.
The city received notice in the fall that we'd received an additional $334,849 through CARES 3 funding. At that time, we were told that we needed to amend our most recent plan that was adopted, which was our fiscal year 2021 plan. And council did receive that amendment in November. But then in December, we received notice that HUD wants all CARES funding to be in our FY 19-20 annual action plan. So we're bringing this back to you for amendment to make sure that it's in the correct year. The funding's to be used to prevent, prepare, and respond to the needs of low and moderate income persons impacted by the pandemic. It needs to address gaps in service and not duplicate services. We're continuing to work closely with lenders, the school district, local governments, social service agencies, homeless service providers, economic development groups, the Housing Authority, just a variety of agencies to identify those gaps in services. We've also reached out through our National Community Development Association to look at other communities and where they're using this CARES Act funding. And at this time, it looks like the majority of agencies throughout the country are using the programs for, or using the funding for housing and business assistance programs. By completing this HUD administrative requirement, the programs can be implemented and we don't have to come back to do another consolidated plan amendment process. We will be bringing proposed programs for the COVID programs for approval at a future date. The proposed amendment also outlines unexpended funding from regular CDBG funds for FY 19-20. So you'll notice as you look to, if you look at the two budgets, the one that was amended in May of 2020 and the one that I'm proposing now, you'll see that the additional $334,000 was added. And then under public services, there are two new items in the budget. One is for first followers. They came to council in December requesting assistance similar to what they had with the city of Champaign for a welcome home package. They're finding that as people exit the prison system, they're having a difficult time reentering into the community, and the pandemic is making it much more difficult. Staff has been working with first followers to outline the program guidelines and make sure that it fits into the HUD guidelines. They're proposing this program would help residents of Urbana with short-term housing assistance, provide a small clothing allowance, as well as a phone to use in job search and housing searches, that type of thing. They anticipate serving 12 people with the program. The second item addition is the public facilities equipment. And this is for AED equipment for the fire department. The level of service changed at the beginning of COVID when Region 6 and Carl took away life-saving drugs and physical life-saving skills due to the protocol changes made by the state of Illinois. The response time to citizens in the southeast portion of the community has seen a large increase. Since ambulances are not stationed at the fire department, this equipment will allow the fire department to provide an increased level of service to citizens in our low to moderate census tract, as well as prevent sending people to the emergency room. This funding will serve the 3 fire stations located in eligible census tracts. And then the other differences in the funding on these two budgets is, for example, the transitional housing budget. What I put in the proposed one now is our actual expenditures. That program for 19-20 is ended. We know what we actually spent, so I put that actual number in there. Same with the neighborhood revitalization program. We funded 2 major capital improvement projects. We know what our costs were at that point, so we had anticipated spending 407,000, and we ended up spending 295,000. So that's where a little bit of these funding savings come through. And then the balance, the 575,000 is our COVID assistance programs. And like I said, we have launched the small business and the housing assistance, and then we'll be bringing proposed projects with this new money back to council, hopefully soon.
Are there any questions for Sheila? Mary Alice?
Sheila, I noticed in your list of eligible activities for these funds, it was mentioned improvements for broadband, improvements for public service programs. I was wondering if that includes school-age children?
Yeah, I've been working with the school district probably starting in November, trying to identify the gaps in broadband, because we're hearing from others that children don't have access. So we thought maybe we would set up, maybe learning hubs or extend the infrastructure. And what we have found out is that really where the gap is people need help with their monthly bill. That's where the need is. And that's unfortunately not something that we can provide help with. But I talked to the IT person at the middle school or for the Urbana School District, and he said that they've provided Chromebooks to everybody, and that this time they just didn't see there was a gap that we could help with this funding.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for reaching out to them.
Sure.
Okay. Jared? And then
Quick follow-up. Oftentimes, Sheila, when people say that they've given Chromebooks to everybody, they mean that they've given them a Chromebook to every household that's requested it. But oftentimes that doesn't mean that every child that needs one in a house has gotten one. And there's a gap there because it's like, well, I have 4 kids and we only got one Chromebook, so only one of the kids can actually attend their class. Do you have any clarification on whether or not they actually mean physical individual students per household, or just like households that have requested?
It was my understanding in my discussions with the school district was that each child that needed one had one, and that they have set up in their gymnasiums learning hubs. So those kids that needed the little bit extra help or their parents may not be home, they had a place to go to be able to connect to the internet and continue with their remote learning.
Okay. Just curious.
Sure.
So the 575 for assistance programs, is that current balance or is that just total award net?
That's total. That's what we've received
gross total award. That's what we've got. What's our current balance with the additional amount we're proposing to accept?
We're right at the 334 because we've spent 250. I'm sorry, we spent 250 for the business assistance, and we've spent if we fund all of the applications I currently have, we'll have spent another 40,000. So it leaves about 210,000.
Okay, so we're at about having spent what we had up until we got this.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, those are my questions. Thanks.
Okay, Bill Brown.
Yeah, I had a question about the $60,000 for the property acquisition demolition. I see it's still in the summary table, but in the itemized part, it looks like it's got a strike through. Did it change funding sources? It says CDBG, then 60,000 struck through.
And which line item was that again? I'm sorry.
That was property acquisition demolition.
Yeah, we actually used a grant through the Illinois Housing Development Authority to run that program, and so we didn't expend those funds, and that's why has a strike through.
Okay, but it's still listed in the summary table. Is that right?
I'm not sure what. Let me pull up what you're looking at. I have listed the emergency access housing rehab program. And that is actual dollars that we spent already in 1920.
I guess I'm looking at page 2 under neighborhood revitalization programs. It's still listed there.
Okay. Open it up here. Oops. On page 2.
Yeah.
And that's the one with the 1.3 million balance.
Yes. That 1.3 is on page 3.
Yeah, that's my proposed amended budget. The 900,000 is the one that was adopted in May by council.
Okay.
Maybe we could we label those differently,
It says
Sheila?
May 2020. I wasn't, that's all right. Okay, I was just reading it wrong.
Yeah, I have adopted in May 2020 on the first one, and then the second one is proposed.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, Eric Sachs.
So going back to the internet connectivity issue for the school children, is it possible to use the funds to build out a wireless network? And if so, could a deal be made with one of the service providers in exchange to provide free service for school-age children?
We can't provide the utility bill assistance. We did reach out to Volo and worked with them along with, looked at the state of Illinois broadband grant that they were issuing, hoping that we could partner these two together. But in looking at the two of them, these funds just were not a good match for what they were needing. And as a matter of fact, Urbana is fairly well built out infrastructure wise. And so they didn't really have a need for the additional funds and so didn't apply for the state of Illinois grant.
I guess I was suggesting an alternative where we built out a wireless network, which we don't have a great one covering most of the city, I think, and that we wouldn't directly be using the funds to provide for the students, but the internet providers could do that as a community good. I don't know if that's possible. Just a thought.
Sure.
I do know that there is somebody at the university who is working on building out traveling buses with network, with Wi-Fi, and parking them in different neighborhoods. I don't know. I'm sure the school districts know about that, but just
yeah, and talking with them, because my first thought on all of this was broadband seemed like the easy answer and what we were hearing. But they said that the biggest problem that they're finding is that people have access. It's ran to the house. The infrastructure is in place, but it's paying that monthly bill that people are having trouble with.
Yeah, that can be an issue. Are there any more questions, comments?
If I can just state, we did something differently with this memo in that our recommendation is to send it to council on the consent agenda. So I'm not sure if you'd seen that before, so I just wanted to point that out as a potential motion.
Okay, so can I get a motion?
I'll make that motion. I'll move that we send resolution number 2021-01-002, a resolution approving an amendment to the City of Urbana Consolidated Plan and Annual Action Plan for FY 1920 forward to full council. Actually, I mean, I guess I got to make a different motion if we want to do consolidated. I'll move that we consider resolution 2021-01-002 to be considered on the consent agenda.
And I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion or questions? Okay. No one? Okay, Ms. Clark, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
All right, next on the agenda is
But we got to
ordinance.
make the second motion, Sharice.
Oh, I'm sorry. Another motion.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, I'm like trying to move on. Go ahead.
All right, now I'll move resolution 2021-02-002R, resolution approving an amendment to the City of Urbana Consolidated Plan and Annual Action Plan FY 2019-2020 be sent to the full council under the consent agenda for approval.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Miss, are there any discussion? Is there any discussion or questions?
Yeah, I guess I
Yes,
have.
Dennis.
Will this be then combined with another resolution coming up for a consent agenda? Usually we do that with several different items on the agenda. We group them. Is there a grouping that we see here?
We, if I could speak, we didn't do it with the fire grant, but if we want to add something to the consent agenda, I think that would be something we should consider.
We should probably do resolutions with resolutions, eggs and eggs.
I don't see why that can't be done.
If I could, Sharice?
Mm-hmm.
And Phyllis might want to weigh in here too. We've had some conversations recently. We think that building a consent agenda is a little bit easier than the previous clerk might have suggested. And so any item that you approve unanimously or that seems to have general support, it doesn't have to be related to each other. You can build a consent agenda as a way of facilitating action at the council. So as you go forward, if items seem like they have a high level of support and don't warrant further discussion, you can just kind of keep adding them.
Okay, that's good clarification. Thanks.
So do we need to make a motion to move the previous resolution into the consent agenda?
You would have to do that, and Phyllis, I guess, is going to guide you there.
In essence, what you should do, if you're going to do that, if you're talking about one item to move to the consent agenda, then you don't want to do that because that's not the way it's supposed to be. If you're going to move all the resolutions, such as the one for fire, this one, and whatever else it is that deals with the anything like what we've discussed so far, then you can put all of those on a consent agenda. And when you bring it back to the city council, you take one vote and everything goes. You don't go through each item again.
Okay. So my question, Ms. Clark, is with the resolution that we've already passed to move on to city council regarding the firefighters assistance, accepting this that grant, should we add that? You're saying we shouldn't add that to, or we can add that to the consent agenda for that Jared just passed, or we just passed for Sheila's for resolution 2021-01003.
Well, actually, the one for the firefighters is totally different.
Okay.
Than the agenda that's dealing with the annual action plan. So I wouldn't put both of those together if it were me, but this is the council's agenda and you guys can tell me what you want to do with it.
Jared.
I think we'd be all right to add it. I mean, it enjoys unanimous support, so I think it's just procedural, Ms. Clerk, if we can, because we already passed it, to go to the regular agenda, do we need to rescind that motion, or can we just make a new motion to add it to the consent?
No, you wouldn't need to go back and do any of that. If you want to add it to a consent agenda, then you've already told me, so that's what we will do.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and make a motion then to add resolution number 2021-002 1-01-001R to the consent agenda.
And I'll second.
Okay. So it's been moved by Jared and seconded by Mary Alice to add resolution number 2021-01-001R also to the consent agenda. Is there any discussions or questions regarding this motion?
No.
Okay, let's vote, please. Thank you, Ms. Clark.
Okay, Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller.
Yes, thank you.
All right, on our next agenda item, ordinance number 2021-01-001, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, budget amendment number 5, Omnibus, and this is the Finance Department. And hello, Elizabeth.
Wow. So this, as Sharice pointed out, is an omnibus budget amendment. We've got a number of items on here, so I will run through this quickly. And I'm sure you will probably have questions about some of these. We have several changes that affect the general operating fund, which would increase revenues by $53,000 and increase expenditures by $276,000. However, at the same time, with our year-end results, we've recalculated our ending fund balance, so you will actually see a substantial increase from what we had on our last amendment. So we expect that we'd have an estimated ending fund balance of 9.6 million, almost 28% of expenditures. That's a good place to be because, as we know, we're still assessing the impact of COVID on the budget, and so we need that safety net there. Specific changes, there's the move to reallocate funds from City Council travel to implement gender neutral language. Several changes related to COVID testing. We would like to implement weekly testing to identify asymptomatic but infected individuals who should be quarantined. And this is all in the interest of reducing spread within the workplace to keep our employees safe. The Public Health District has made rapid tests available to the city at no cost, but there are some related costs for PPE, waste disposal, and items like that. So we've estimated that to be $5,500 that would get us through the remainder of the fiscal year. We've also been exploring with the University of Illinois using their saliva test. And we've included $25,000 here that could be used at least to begin an arrangement with them. I think that it's likely we'll probably end up doing some of each, because some will work better in some circumstances. One might work better than the other. In the fire department, we're requesting an increase of about $167,000 in overtime. That's a very large number. They've experienced an unusual amount of overtime, partly related to duty injuries, but also related to absences because of illnesses or exposure to COVID. And as you know, firefighters work 24-hour shifts. So there's a substantial cost. A typical 24-hour shift on overtime is about $900. The department already made a good effort to reallocate funds from other line items, and they've reallocated about $53,000 from other personnel lines to supplement their original overtime budget. So the next item, we are requesting $5,000 to hire a professional grant writer to apply for a SAFER grant. And SAFER is a federal program, staffing for adequate fire and emergency response. We've talked in recent years multiple times about staffing in the fire department and the fact that we are experiencing a lot of overtime, which is not only a cost issue, but it's also not necessarily healthy for our firefighters. So this is an opportunity for us to get 5 additional positions funded for a 3-year period. And we can then more fully assess what the impact is on overtime with the additional staffing, but it should substantially reduce overtime. So the cost for the grant writer is $5,000. As Chief Loss mentioned earlier, the assistance for firefighter grant that you move to the next agenda, that would also require an adjustment to the budget. We would also receive an Illinois Arts Council grant for $9,900. And those are the changes in the general fund. In the capital improvement fund, we're recommending an expenditure of about $31,000 to equip city facilities with some new technology that would improve indoor air quality. This would be integrated with our HVAC system and would reduce the potential spread of COVID and other airborne infectious diseases. In the motor fuel tax fund, there's a pretty simple change just to shift $5,000 between 2 different capital improvement projects. That's necessary because the city requires that any change that changes the budget for an improvement project by more than 10% has to come to the city council. In the vehicle and equipment replacement fund, we would rebudget 2 items that were in last year's budget, but just because of timing, those items didn't happen last year. So this would include a system for backing up police body camera data, which would be $15,000, and then some AED defibrillator units for the fire department at about $26,000. In the CD special fund, just minor changes related to administrative costs for some of the other grants. And in the CD grant fund, the emergency solutions grant requires some budget changes. That's about $194,000. CDBG CARES 3, which is $270,000, sorry. And then also CDBG and home funds that we would receive in any normal year would be rebudgeted from last year to this year. That's just a matter of timing. Grants don't work on fiscal years. And so sometimes depending on how quickly we spend the money, we need to shift it between budget years. So again, general fund estimated fund balance at the end of this fiscal year would be almost 28% of expenditures. So we're recommending that you forward this to council for approval, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions for Elizabeth? Mary Alice.
Elizabeth, so thank you. And I know that the chief is also involved in trying to understand a little bit better about the overtime for the fire department. I think it's a really interesting idea to try and get a grant that would fund 3 additional firefighters so that we could see what is the ideal staffing that would bring those numbers of for overtime, and then the health of our firefighters, of course, hopefully in better shape. My question to you is, well, I mean, the public certainly mentioned that there's going to be a shift, there's going to be a change in council in 3 years. And so I'm wondering if there is some kind of strategy when we go through the budget and that budget is presented to city council that we account for after the first year. Here's the previous amount of money that we had in overtime so that we can track and see what those overtime numbers have been. And I know that we already have line items in terms of the amount that we spend in the different fiscal years in that book. But I do think it's something that maybe we just need to call attention to, because it's very possible that in 3 years, either people aren't on this council or people will have forgotten exactly about this grant. So I'm just trying to keep that at the forefront of our mind.
Yeah, so we've talked about the fact that to some extent this is an experiment, and depending on the result we get at the end of the 3 years, we may want to ask the city council to continue funding those 5 positions, or we may decide that the experiment didn't work and it's not worth continuing. But obviously that evaluation involves, looking at the overtime that occurs, now and during the period of the grant, assuming we receive the grant, which obviously that's still to be determined by the federal government. And so we would evaluate our overtime experience and the causes of the overtime to see specifically what the impact of those additional positions is.
All right. I guess I think it would be a good reminder to people on council that this is why we have this additional expense. We've got a grant covering the additional expense, but the next year or the next 2 years or however many years is left on the grant. Perhaps maybe just even a note in the very beginning description of the budget is just adding something in there that this is the second year of, this grant that covers the cost of 3 firefighters, et cetera. Yep. Awesome.
Dennis.
Yes. Okay, Elizabeth, thank you. I just was noticing that there was, I guess, maybe an omission perhaps of a data point in the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund, the VERF fund. The first item that you mention is police body camera backup server. And you've been very diligent about including the amount of the funding that is going to be changed in the budget for that, but you omitted mentioning it in this particular item. You said it was $15,000. It might be wise to add that figure to the memo and to the ordinance that we are going to be passing for clarity.
And that was an oversight on my part, but it is in the ordinance. So if you look at the exhibit that's attached always to budget amendments, it's in that list of expenditures there.
Okay, great. It just seemed like a very handy thing to be consistent, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Bill Brown. You have a question?
Yeah, I know we've been spending quite a bit of money on temporary hires or temporary employees. It looks like in December is it's over $30,000. Does that count? Will that be a budget amendment? Does that count as services, or does that count as salaries? Will we need a budget amendment for that?
So if you're talking about temporary employees that we hire through an agency like Spherion, that's a service. It's not a personnel cost. And so in some cases that does require a budget amendment because if we have a vacant position, we need to move that money into a line. We've done that a couple of times already this year. So we did that in the case of Public Works, where we hired an interim Public Works director through an outside agency. We did that in an earlier budget amendment. I think we also did that in the legal department when we had a vacancy and we hired some outside help with FOIA. So at this point, I'm not aware of any other situation like that where we have to amend the budget, but that doesn't mean that it won't happen.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any more questions for Elizabeth? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. And seeing as it's not very controversial, I'll make a motion to put this on the consent agenda. So I will move that ordinance number 2021-01001, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, budget amendment number 5, Omnibus, be moved to City Council on the consent agenda.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. It's been moved by Mary Alice to move this resolution to a consent agenda and seconded by Jared. Is there any discussion or questions? Okay, Ms. Clark, will you call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Sachs?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay, do we have a motion to move this to City Council for approval?
I will make
that.
that.
All we have to do.
I'll make the motion to move this ordinance to city council for approval. Ordinance number 2021-01-001. An ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, budget amendment number 5.
I will also second that motion.
Any discussion or questions? Mrs. Clark, will you call the roll?
Yeah, I will just a sec, but you guys don't have to move this a second time like that.
Oh,
If you
okay.
move it to go to the consent agenda, you can make you're saying that you're going to move it there for an approval.
Okay.
For passing in the first place, okay?
Okay.
Okay, Ms.
So
Wu?
we don't have to do,
I withdraw my motion then.
Okay.
Did time on that.
okay, so that's fine. Then moving on to the next agenda item. Amending a resolution, our resolution number 2021-01-003R, the resolution amending the city council and committee of the whole rules. Is anyone speaking to this?
I don't know if Jared or Dennis want to, but I'm happy to if they don't want to on their behalf.
I can briefly introduce, and Carol, we can go over what we ended up on.
Okay.
So just for the public's reference, this is one part of two parts of changes to the council rules, basically to add a formal item to the agenda, allowing council members to respond to public comments and or make unrelated comments to public comments, announcements, and things of that nature, where we don't have a formal process to do so, even though it's informally allowed in our rules. And we debated this at a committee of the whole meeting a couple of times. And then with some work with city staff, we've come up with the final language that has legal approval for how it's going to go down. And to Dennis and my opinion, it meets what we were intending to do with the ordinance. We did take into consideration the limitation for 3 minutes, and then only allowing a single 30-second response at the end from individual council members if so chosen, so as to keep with the brevity of moving along the meetings, in addition to placing the agenda items as it was suggested differently on council and committee meetings.
Yeah, and I could say that for the committee of the whole, the agenda item will be right after the public input, and in the council meeting, it will be at the end.
I think the opposite.
Yeah.
The opposite. Oh, I mean, okay.
Right after public input at council and at the end in committee.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I did forget that.
Bill Brown had his hand up first. Bill?
Yeah, for clarification, we're voting on the second version that has the markup in it. Is that right?
Well, I'm proposing these additional changes. I wanted you to have a copy of essentially what came out of your discussion, and that's the first copy that is attached to the report. But then there's the markup version, which is some additional changes that incorporate suggestions from our legal counsel and some cleanup, and then one sort of substantive change that I am requesting that you include to when council members want to bring an ordinance or resolution forward that would clarify what the process is. So I would prefer that you move the marked up version forward as the more complete.
Okay, Bill, you want to?
Yeah, I think that I like most of the language changes in the markup. There's the one part I don't think I agree with is the, where is it? Okay, I think it's in 34, no, just rule 4C. I'd like to retain the language at the end of that paragraph where it says, or in the case of public input on any matter presented during the public input portion of the meeting. this isn't just for online meetings. This is for everything, right? I think once we get back to in-person meetings, that's the way we always were able to ask questions of people. I think once we get back into in-person meetings, there'll probably be less people reading things and more people bringing issues that are in their neighborhoods and have information that we might need clarification on.
I guess I'm confused, Trace.
Okay, Mary Alice.
Sorry. Bill, I'm confused in terms of the area because you said Rule 4. I don't see any markup in Rule 4.
It used to be Rule 3, I think.
There's Rule 3 that has a lot of markup.
Rule 4 is debate limits.
Debate limits. It says, I think it has 3 crossed out and 4 and says debate limits.
Yeah. So which item do you want to keep? The only thing that I see here that's changed is gender neutral items.
Are you in the marked up version, which is the second version that has, it's a red line?
Page 9 of the memo. Paragraph C.
Nothing in subsections A and B.
Yeah, okay. I was in the beginning part of it.
Bill's talking about the part that says, or in the case of public input on any matter presented during public input portion of the meeting.
So yeah, that's something I think I'd be fine with it if we left that in there, and then I think the rest of the markup to me is okay.
So, sorry, I'll raise my hand.
Sharice, Mary Alice has a question.
Mary Alice, I'm sorry, go ahead. Thank you. I'm looking at the thing too.
And so just for clarification, the marked up part that Bill was just talking about, that's what is one person is proposing as the change language, but then the portion before that that's also marked up is, where does that stand? I guess there's 2 documents, it looks like here. There's 2 versions of this, and that's what I'm trying to figure out, because I just read the first version, I guess maybe erroneously. Is the second version what legal has gone through? Is that, Carol, is that what's going
It's
on
a
here?
combination. It's a combination of, and I tried to annotate each additional change, whether it came from legal or whether it was a consistency change, because sometimes it said alderperson and we changed everything to council members. And then I had the substantive change to what is new rule number 5, draft resolutions and ordinances presented by council and committee members. And that's a substantive change about process for bringing ordinances forward from council and committee members. And then Bill noted the one additional one that I thought was clarifying, but I have no problem, you're right. I was thinking still of virtual meetings because it seems like, well, I feel like we'll be in virtual mode forever, but I'm hoping we won't be. So I'm requesting that when you move this forward, you move it forward with as many of the markups as possible.
Okay, and so I did have a suggestion on the ones before, but trying to read through the second markup might actually address those 2 items. I mean, basically the 2 items was I felt like, to be consistent in terms of how rules are written, we don't really give reasons or rationales as to why the rule is. We just talk about the rule, what it is. And so in rule number 3, originally it said to allow due process in acknowledging concerns of council members and concerns raised by the public. I felt it would be better to just start with council members will have the opportunity. And then, so I apologize if it's been suggested already to be changed. And then in the second piece that I was looking at was under topics considered appropriate are as follows. I was thinking that rather than just saying responses to past or current public input given in session or via email, we could just do comments on any past or current public concerns. Just make it blank. So those were my two suggestions as I read through this.
Okay, Dennis, he had his hand up first, Jared.
Well, so I'm wondering if we haven't all absorbed the changes that are being suggested by Carol Minton. Do we want to send this forward without recommendation and have more of an understanding of the final, before we make a final vote on it in council?
I'd support that if you made that motion, Dennis.
Because I think that, some of these substantive changes, especially as it requires a different kind of review process for the council's intentions to be going through the legal division, which I don't have a disagreement about, but I haven't really absorbed all the other implications that might be involved with sending forward a resolution from the council itself. So I guess I would say that because we haven't quite absorbed or discussed adequately the details of how that might happen, we could support generally sending this forward to council with approval, with no recommendation at this time. We can have final discussion about the wording and agreement about it at the council meeting. That's a motion.
Is there, okay, you're making a motion?
Yeah.
I'll second that motion to send forward with no recommendation.
No recommendation.
Okay, so it's been moved by Dennis and seconded by Jared to move this ordinance forward to city council without recommendation. Correct? Okay.
Yeah, that was the motion and the second. And there's a question. I see Mary Alice says.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Are there any questions? And Mary Alice has had her hand up, and Bill Colebrook, you had your hand up too. Mary Alice, go ahead.
My question is, what we're moving forward, are both of these items? Or are we moving forward what is in the second markup?
The second markup, and it might be that we want to make changes to the second markup to adjust it according to the needs of the council.
Okay, then I would request staff send the second markup as a Word document, since it looks like it's already in a Word document.
Yes.
That would be helpful.
I have a question. Bill, go ahead. Bill Colebrook, you go first.
I was just trying to say that I was going to support what Dennis was saying prior to the motion, but it's a moot point now because I'll just vote in favor of it.
Okay. I guess the question that I have, Mary Alice, if you could take the chair for a minute.
Yep, absolutely. The chair recognizes Sharice Hersey.
I would like to understand if this is going to be a consolidation maybe of the two, or are we talking about accepting one over the other?
The markup is a consolidation. It's built on the first one. So what the first version is what came out of your discussion, and that was prior to legal review, and that was prior to getting staff input. That was not just making the edits that had already been discussed. So the markup builds on top of what Dennis and Jared brought forward and that you all discussed. So it's not an either or, it's one is built on top of the other, as I see it.
Okay, thank you. Mary Alice, I'll take the chair back and recognize Eric Sachs.
Just a quick question. Carol, could you describe the intent behind the substantive change that you added?
Yeah. The substantive change, actually, I was more informed about it because I was handling the draft resolution that came from two council members. And from a processing perspective, I felt that it would be easier if there was one consolidated version that made its way to the council with all the input from staff and legal prior to you seeing it, which is why I have the second half of the substantive part of the proposal, which is that you send it through the city administrator, send a draft of an ordinance or a resolution through the city administrator. However, there's nothing wrong with what Dennis and Jared did, but it needs to be understood that if you go that route and you haven't yet made your way through staff and legal, that it can really only be a discussion item, that you shouldn't be taking any kind of proposed action on an item that hasn't been through that review. So if you go the route where you go sort of directly to the clerk, that it can be a discussion item, or my preference would be that you come through the city administrator and you put it through all its paces, and then you wouldn't end up with two versions in front of you.
Okay, Jared.
And it may be, Carol, that we need to consider that separately from what we're proposing in our changed rules, because that's substantively different than the intention of the original changes that were proposed. And we're talking about process and not about council discussion now. So I don't know that it's appropriate to include it in what Dennis and I had sent. Now that I'm hearing that, because that's a completely different issue with a completely different discussion.
Okay, I mean, it's your call. It's as germane as some of the other changes, but you know, the cleanup changes, but it's your call entirely.
Dennis, what do you think?
I think you do have a point. Yeah, what is being introduced is a new aspect that we hadn't really discussed about how process is done. What we're trying to do is make a public participation, responding to public participation possible for the city council. So
how about if I do this, that I will send you the markup. I will remove the substantive change that I proposed. I will remove the item that Bill wanted to have removed as well. I will leave in the legal pieces and the consistency pieces, and then I'll send that to you as a Word document, and that's what we'll bring forward for consideration at the council. Does that sound okay?
to me, it does. It seems a very responsible and a good response. Yes.
Bill Colebrook.
I also just want to make a point that I appreciate the council. We're starting to use the consent agenda for items that are non-controversial because in the past we've passed these on from committee of the whole to the council. Then we end up traveling over the same territory that we did just 1 week prior. So now I anticipate when we get to the council meeting, we'll be able to pass those non-controversial things in a quick motion because we've already discussed them in council of the whole, which allows us to debate issues like this that actually need more time as opposed to debating all issues 100% of the time. So just want to make a quick comment.
Okay, any more comments or questions? Jared.
If that is, I just would like to pose a question to the motioner, since we were motioning without a recommendation for approval because of those changes. But if that's not going to be considered in part of what we do, I would suggest to the motioner that we do send it with the recommendation for approval.
Well, sorry, I'll say my turn.
Go ahead, Mary Alice.
No, but they're talking about their motion. I'll have my chance to have my comment.
Okay, Dennis, did you have to have anything that you wanted to add to that, because you motioned, you moved it?
So yeah, I mean, I certainly am in approval of the intent of this resolution. So I'm fine with changing the recommendation for approval, pending a few edits that we are hoping to receive from our city administrator.
And I would second a recommendation for approval.
Okay, so you want to change a recommendation for approval?
Right.
And I have a question.
Mary Alice.
So in that case, do other people have thoughts about removing that first part of that sentence under rule number 3, so that sentence just starts with council members will have the opportunity to provide input, responses communications pursuant to the following rules, and just leave out the first part. And then the second piece would be I, so it's, sorry, I can't read this. Is it letter C, A, B, C, D, E? It's the last one under topics to consider appropriate are as follows. I just would say responses to past or current public, I don't even know if we need to say input, public concerns, because it could be that we want to make a comment about something that a constituent brought up to us in a personal email, is what I'm saying. That might be relevant. So that's why I just want to make it a little broader for that one. So those are my two suggestions in terms of altering the words, but other than that, I don't have any issues with it.
So. Okay, Jared, you had a question?
I was just gonna make a comment that, yeah, I agree, Mary Alice. I don't think that, I mean, I don't know that we define input in it anywhere, in our rules or in city code anywhere that would like limit us to only what was literally given in email or in public. I mean, we say given in session or email, but we could just end it with past or public input, because public input can come in many forms.
Yeah, I was just trying to get out of the word of input and just say concerns, right? Because it could be concerns in any form. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't have to be public input given during city council. It could be concerns that are brought to us as, you know, from constituents saying, I had a concern about this, and maybe other people would be interested in the answer. That's why I wanted to get rid of that specific input and just make it broader.
So replace input with concerns and get rid of given in session or via email and just end it with concerns.
Yep.
Okay, I'd support that change.
And then the second piece is, or the first piece was to just start the paragraph with council members will have the opportunity to provide. Yeah. Is to take off that first clause.
Oh, I got you. Get rid of the to acknowledge concerns and blah, blah, blah.
Right, because it's all these are rules in terms of how we operate.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that, I guess.
Yeah, I would suggest that you make then a motion to amend.
Okay, I will make a motion to amend rule number 3 to begin with council members will have the opportunity to provide input, responses, etc., and remove the text previous to that. The second piece would be under topics considered appropriate are as followed. The text would now read responses to past or current public issues. Or wait, sorry, let me rephrase. Responses to past or current public concerns.
Okay, I guess I'll second that then. I agree.
Okay, it has been moved to be amended for Rule 3 and I don't know what part. And another, what's the other part, Mary Alice?
It's
C1.
E1. It's E1.
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 For it's been moved for amendments to be made to this resolution in those particular sections. Do I have a second? Oh, Dennis seconded. And yep. Okay, do we have any more discussion regarding the amended edited version of this particular resolution? Okay, Ms. Clark, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Sachs?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Now, my other question now is, do we need to change the motion from without recommendation to approval and vote on that again? Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Okay. Then is there anyone that wants to make a motion to move the amended resolution to City Council for approval?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, it has been moved by Jared and seconded by Dennis.
Sharice, could you state the resolution number? I'm not sure it's ever been stated in this whole discussion, just to have it on the record.
I stated it. Let me see. It is resolution number 2021-01-003R, a resolution amending the city council and committee of the whole rules. So his move and seconded. Are there any, is there any discussion? Okay, Ms. Clark, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Item number 10. Thank you very much, Ms. Clark. Item number 10, ordinance number 2021-01-002, an ordinance amending City Code Chapter 2, Section 2-27, City Council members and mayor. Do you want to discuss this?
I guess I can introduce it, that this was the second part of the previous thing in order to affect the order change in the agendas. We have to change the ordinance amending the city code so that we can follow the rule of the previous ordinance. So that's what's in this.
Are there any questions to Jared? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion that we send ordinance number 2021-01-002, an ordinance amending City Code Chapter 2, Section 2-27, with changes to council rules by adding an item to agendas for council member comments and communications be sent to the full council with recommendation for approval.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? Questions? Ms. Clark, will you call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, resolution number 2021-01-004R, resolution regarding the implementation of gender neutral language and official written and verbal communications by the city of Urbana and council members. And who's going to present this? Or
I guess I can introduce it and Carol can talk about how it's gonna, how we see implementation. So this was just for the public's reference, a resolution that was championed by former council member Julie Lout, who I worked with on this after her departure from council to get the city moving on adopting gender neutral language in all of its official communications and how it conducts its business generally. We've had some substantive discussion about how that would go forward, offered some changes to...
I am at work. I'm at a council meeting. Yeah.
I don't think
I'm at a council meeting. Oh, that's okay.
You're not muted, Phyllis.
You're unmuted, Phyllis.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Thank you for
Bye,
sharing.
Kurt. I'm sorry, it was my grandson calling me.
Thank you, Jared. You can continue, Jared. I'm sorry.
Oh, Ms. Wu, what am I doing? Tell me, what am I doing, y'all?
We're just discussing. We're just discussing. Phyllis.
So I just need to turn this off. Okay, goodbye.
You can mute it. There we go. Okay, Jared, I'm sorry. Could you continue?
Yeah, so we offered some language changes to allow for implementation over time, though nothing majorly substantive changed about it. Those are some small changes, and Carol can talk about how we foresee that being applied in this at the city.
Thanks. I just wanted to, the reason I wrote the memo is I wanted people to understand, you know, the sort of the nature of the effort. I polled the department heads and asked, you know, what they thought would be involved. And so I've tried to lay out what we can do in the short term and you know, with our staff, what we'll be able to tackle in terms of, you know, we'll focus on outward facing documents and so forth and the website, but we've already had challenges with trying to update the website as it is. So we'll have to do that, you know, sort of piecemeal. And then, you know, this is going to take years to really fully accomplish this, but it's something that, you know, in the short term, we'll do the Muni code changes. And we found out it's actually going to cost another $3,000 for the implementation, but we've identified that in the executive department's budget. So between the council travel, education and training, and the money from the exec budget, we'll be able to do the Muni code. And then we'll be working on some training for staff so that as we are communicating with people on an ongoing basis, whether it's, you know, in city council sessions or on the phone or in formal communications or more informal things like email, that we'll be incorporating these new practices about how to communicate in a gender neutral manner. So that there will be some training that will happen, and we hope to extend that to our boards and commission members, as well as any council members that want to participate. And it's possible we may, since we're in a virtual format, that we may even be able to include members of the public who are interested. So that's all yet to be developed, but that's what the effort will be in the short term, is Muni code and staff training.
Are there any questions for Carol or Jared regarding this before I ask for a motion? Do I have a motion?
I'll go ahead and make the motion to send resolution number 2021-01-004R, a resolution regarding the implementation of gender neutral language in official written and verbal communications by the city of Urbana, be sent forward to the full council with recommendation for approval.
And I'll second that.
Okay. It has been moved by Jared and seconded by Mary Alice. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Clark, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, and that motion, that passes.
Sure.
Next. Yes, Jared.
Just since we can do it in one motion, I don't know that we need to do it so long as we're making the intent known to the clerk, and this is enjoying unanimous consent. Would there be any objections to considering this on a consent agenda by anybody here?
I have no.
Okay, well, let it be known. Let's put it on the consent agenda.
Ms. Clark, will you please include this particular resolution in the consent agenda?
Yes, we will.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. And the last number on the agenda, ordinance number 2021-01-003, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 12, exceptions to the Human Rights Ordinance. And we have an executive to bring that.
Taking that, and I would like to ask, Jason has a slide deck that he's going to put up for me, and I'd also ask him to upgrade Pete Resnick to a panelist. So Pete Resnick and I will be presenting this item together. Pete is the vice chair of the Human Relations Commission. He and I have been working together on this, and we don't have precisely the exact same information to propose, given that there was a slightly different resolution that went to the HRC, but he'll explain that as we go through the slide deck. But I do appreciate his efforts, and also that he waited very patiently to the end to join me to do this. So thank you, Pete.
I got work done during the meeting, so.
I would have only expected you to be productive. So setting a good example. So if you could flip the first slide. So I wanted to start off by focusing on the language that's in the ordinance related to exceptions, and the language is in section 12-105, and it says in D, the provisions of this article shall not apply to other units of government, including the federal government or any of its agencies, the state of Illinois, and any other political subdivision, municipal corporation, or their agencies. So that's what it says. If you could go to the next slide. So I also wanted to share with you, and I elaborate on this a little bit more in the memo about past practice. Prior to the informal hearing at the HRC on November 10th, all previous interpretations were that the city was not subject to the jurisdiction of Article 3 of the Human Rights Ordinance. And that the little hearing, the informal hearing on November 10th is the one that you've heard from members of the public about. As I understand it, because I'm relatively new to this subject, but as I understand it, staff recognized the ambiguity and has known about it for a while, but just never took the additional steps to clarify the jurisdictional issue. And so I want to just explain that there's an ambiguity and it needs to be resolved, and it can be resolved in one of two ways. Either the city itself is subject to the jurisdiction of the Human Rights or Human Relations Commission, or it is not subject to the jurisdiction of the Human Relations Commission. So the reason why I think there's a strong implication in the ordinance that the city itself is not subject to the HRC's jurisdiction is because the HRC is a body that is of the city. The members of the body are the city's agents. And if it was intended to be a completely independent body, it would have its own staff and it would have its own council. And because it is not structured that way, I think the strong implication is that the city is not subject to the HRC's jurisdiction. And now we'll flip to the next slide. And this is the one that Pete will explain to you because it has to do with what the HRC considered.
And I will say, by the way, Carol, if you're new to this, so is the entire council, because going back through my email, the first time this issue came up with staff that I was aware of was back in 2004, 2005. It's been around a while. So the HRC for a while, and certainly with these recent informal hearings we've had, has been recommending that the jurisdictional issue be clarified. And let me make clear that the issue here is not whether the city is under HRC jurisdiction. It's about these enforcement and hearings portions of the chapter, right? So Article 3. There's loads of stuff that the city is subject to in Article 2, but the question is about Article 3, which involves enforcement, which involves formal hearings and all the rest. We had a long discussion about this. There are folks, myself included, who think that if we could make the city subject to Article 3, that would be great. We recognize that making the city subject to Article 3 would be logistically difficult. So what we try to do in our resolution is give you the menu, one where we clean up the language to make it clear that the city is excluded from that portion of the ordinance, and the other showing an example where it's included. And we gave you the list of structural changes that would be necessary for the city to be subject to the entire article. You'd need at least independent counsel to deal with not only the hearing, but enforcement actions afterwards. Right now, the officer, the human rights officer, or the city attorney would prosecute the case. And then the city attorney is required to do enforcement actions if fines need to be collected and other things like that. You'd need independent counsel for that, and that would have to be paid for. You would likely want some sort of independent staff. And we didn't even go down the rat hole of what happens if someone on the Human Relations Commission discriminates. That sounds like a nice bottomless pit. So one thing we did is we said, look, if you're, and by the way, we had a relatively small contingent when we passed the resolution and a relatively large contingent of new members who were not really comfortable jumping on one way or the other and committing to, we should tell the city this or we should tell the city that. So they were more comfortable with going with the, let's just give them the menu and city council can sort out what they think is best. We did indicate that if you decide that the city should not be subject to Article 3, that you go ahead and make a statement in the ordinance someplace that you intend to follow the anti-discrimination practices of of Article 3. And if there is a report that the city has somehow not complied with that the commission, as part of its duties in Article 2, will consult with the city and try to figure out how to solve that problem. I can go into, if folks have questions, the history of the ordinance back to 1975 and try to explain where all this came from. But the current state of the ordinance, Carol, is spot on. It's exceedingly ambiguous, though it has generally been, every time the topic has come up, the city has decided, yeah, we don't know how to do that. We can't possibly be subject to this. So that's where we stand.
Okay, and I have one more slide, and it follows on the last point that that Pete had on his slide, which is that in talking with Jared and Dennis, not Dennis, Jared and Bill Brown, they had recommended, so this is a recommended change to what I had originally proposed, but because these conversations were happening after the report had been submitted for the packet, I'm making this change more like in real time. And so this is to strengthen what the recommendation from the HRC is, which is that we subject ourselves and that we show our commitment to complying with the substance of the ordinance. And so this would be an amendment to what is proposed in the memo and the draft ordinance. So rather than say that it is the intent and commitment of the city of Urbana to conform to the requirements of Article 3, Division 2 of this chapter and so on, it would be the city of Urbana shall conform. And that came from Jared and Bill Brown. So I appreciate that. I think that's a great way to strengthen it. And I'll stop there and ask if you have any questions for Pete or I. You're muted, Charisse.
Yeah, Jared.
Thanks, Charisse. Pete, so I'm a little confused. So did the HRC pass a resolution that offered 2 solutions to the problem?
Yep.
Okay.
We basically said, you need to fix this in one of these 2 ways. So we resolved that you fix this, please. But we did not come up with a direct recommendation to fix it one way or the other.
Are you aware that we were only presented with one of those options?
Yes. So
okay.
I understand that staff so were you all not, you all haven't seen the resolution that we passed because our minutes haven't come out yet.
It was not included with our package.
So
that's why I'm.
If you like, I can quickly go over the highlights of if you really want to be included, part of our resolution, or I could email you out the resolution immediately if you want.
Well, I mean, it might just be a question of where we're going here, because I don't necessarily have an interest in spending a ton of time discussing this when we haven't even seen the HRC's resolution on this, that clearly you've made it clear we were given two options and we're only being told we have one option by staff to consider. So, I don't even see what the point of debating this is tonight, because that's a pretty important piece of consideration for me personally.
Carol?
Well, I mean, you clearly have two options. We're recommending one of them, and we're recommending it because the alternative would be to as I said, have a, in order to effectuate having the city subject to these processes of the HRC, you have to have a completely independent HRC, and you do not. So given the existing circumstances, in my mind, there's only really one option.
Jared?
So, I mean, my only response, Carol, is that, I guess when we were talking about this over the weekend, it hadn't even crossed my mind that the HRC had proposed the alternative option, the resolution, or we would have been having a completely different conversation. And I think it would be highly unethical for the city staff to decide how the city gets to be held accountable by the HRO ordinance. Yes, you're providing us your recommendation on which one of the two options that the HRC sent forward, but their intention was not that the city staff would go ahead and cut one of them off and present one to the city. They wanted the city council to decide which one of the ones we wanted, because we're the voice of the people who we represent in our wards, not the city. And the people who we represent need to be able to know what the other option was. It needs to come up for discussion. So there's I just can't see how that, it's irrelevant that we consider it because city staff thinks that it's irrelevant that we consider it.
I didn't say that it was irrelevant. I'm saying that under the circumstances, which is that we do not have a fully separately funded HRC, you would have to completely create an independent body, including independent staff and independent counsel.
Well, and that's a discussion that we need to have then, not that one that you get to decide we don't even deserve to have because you've already decided it's not worth having.
I didn't get that. Mary Alice?
So from what I can see, or from what I can understand, the second possible ordinance would require the city to establish an independent group, a fully independent group with independent staff and independent counsel. And while I don't know how feasible that is, I would like to actually see what that proposal would look like. I'm thinking about the election commission, in which we had to hire an outside council member an outside lawyer to do that, because it wasn't a city board, right? It was an independent board. We did have some help from city staff, but there would be a lot of intricacies to disentangle the HRC from the city. And I do think that we need to understand, and people do need to understand, what that actually would mean. What would that entail? So I guess I think that it would be good if we had that second one, and I would like to propose that we keep it in committee for the next committee, in which we have both of those, and then we can have a conversation. I mean, it could end up costing us $50,000, but at least by then we would know what we're talking about. We would have more information to weigh those.
Dennis?
Yes, it's not really clear to me what jurisdiction the Human Rights Commission really functions under to maintain appropriate interactions between the individuals in this community. We're talking about it being a review process for people to bring complaints. I assume that the complaints are not necessarily against the city, but it may be against practices in the community at large. The manager of a hotel or a service industry or something who is creating an issue concerning the employment practices, which may or may not be against the human relations ordinance of our community. So it's kind of interesting. Most commissions that are engendered by the city and run by city staff and are, where the city staff acts as the secretary and reporting agency to the council, are advisory. And so I don't understand what the judicial strength of actions by the commission would be in relationship to the community at large and to the city itself. We have, of course, we want to obey our own human rights ordinance and avoid conflicts in that area. So, the discussion about having an agency that's overseeing not only the city and the community, but the city's own actions seems partially very useful to us. The only detriment being that this commission is chosen by the mayor and operates with city staff. I want to understand how that works out. If the city itself becomes advised that it's an error, is it just an advisement? But if it was in the community, would it be judicial in some way? Actually, would they have power to bring this to a court?
So Pete, maybe you could start with
Yeah.
that.
So with regard to the community at large, the Human Relations Commission is a quasi-adjudicative body. We are empowered by the ordinance to actually hold a hearing. If we find someone in violation of the ordinance, we are allowed to order the parties to do particular things, reinstatement of employment, changing of their housing requirements. We are allowed to fine to a certain extent the respondent if they have violated the ordinance. We have subpoena power, the whole 9 yards. So we are a fully, we are judge and jury when it comes to these cases. Mm-hmm. Currently, with regard to the city, as we've said, the ordinance is at least ambiguous. If the city were subject to the ordinance, it would be similar to the way the state is subject to the Illinois Department of Human Rights. There are some differences with IDHR, which is why they have an easier time with this problem than we do. But that would require some more independence and someone else prosecuting the cases. Currently, if you bring a complaint to the commission, it is not you versus the respondent. It is the city of Urbana versus the respondent. So the city is actually prosecuting the case. And part of the problem here is city of Urbana versus city of Urbana. That's what you would create if you decided that the city should be subject to these parts of the ordinance, is that the commission could hear a case and order the city to do particular things if it was found in violation. Does that make sense?
And why would that not be fair if the city was not following its own structure and city ordinance about its human relation policy? Certainly it should be advised to correct it.
Right.
But the question is whether it would have to be done by a court, in a court experience. Yeah.
Well, so
a memo to the mayor would probably do it, wouldn't you think? I would hope. I don't know.
So the recommendation, if we do not include, I'm sorry. Yes.
Mayor Merlin, you want
to go ahead and finish, Pete.
The recommendation we made, my apologies. The recommendation we made with regard to if you do not include the city as subject to Article 3 is that reports, just to keep them separate from formal complaints, reports would come to the commission would consult, and there's a whole list of ways the commission consults with the city in order to correct the problem. Mm-hmm. Of course, the city could tell the commission to go jump in a lake if it wanted to. There wouldn't be any further recourse except if you had an independent counsel, the independent counsel could then bring enforcement action in court. That would require the whole, they are subject to it.
Okay, Mayor Marlin.
Which is why the section 12, the language that says the city of Urbana shall conform to the requirements of Article 3 and so on, clearly and clarifies the fact that the city is subject and will follow this ordinance. And it should clear up the ambiguity that we've been experiencing, I think, for 20 years related to this ordinance. This is not the first time it's come up, but no one's ever wanted to deal with it before. And we have to get this straightened out. The idea of a separate board, a separate commission, the electoral board, using the electoral board as an example is it's not going to work at this time. In fact, it won't work at all. We have got to have a simple, straightforward way through this. And I think the language that was added here is the best way to go.
Okay, Mary Alice, then Bill, then Jared, then Eric.
So one of the things that I brought up with Carol when we were talking about this was, what is the recourse? So let's go down the road of, we say that the city is not subjected to Article 3 within this, but we also say that we shall adhere to the rules of the overall intent of the ordinance. Well, somebody could say, well, I don't think that the city is doing that, and I don't have any recourse because you're exempted from Article 3. And Carol, you had mentioned that a lot of stuff that's covered in our human ordinance is also covered by the state, but not everything, but a lot of things. And so the recourse in that part would be to go to the state. If the action isn't working, so this is what I'm just kind of proposing. The action of somebody brings a complaint and feels that the city is not in compliance, the Human Relations Commission goes and works with the mayor and tries to figure out a way that the city can make it work, and they correct it. The opposite is that the mayor says, no, I'm not going to correct it. You still have another recourse to go to the state, because unless it's one or two of the things that we cover that the state doesn't cover, but the vast majority of the stuff that is covered can be adjudicated at the state level. And that was my understanding, Carol, when you and I spoke.
That's what I think. I think that's accurate, and Pete can confirm that.
Yeah, there are several categories of things that the state doesn't cover. But the state, if you wanted to bring a complaint against the city, you could immediately go to IDHR. The only trick with IDHR, and it's part of why IDHR is able to pull this off, is my understanding is you bring the complaint to IDHR, they will get all the way through to the point of certifying the complaint. But once this complaint is certified, it is not the state of Illinois versus the city of Urbana. It is whoever you are bringing the complaint versus the city of Urbana, and you are responsible for your own legal fees if you want to do that, which is one of the nice things about our ordinance, is that it is the city of Urbana versus the respondent. It is not you personally. But that is a path of recourse. It is absolutely true.
Okay, Bill Brown.
Yeah, I appreciate the change to make it clear that the city is subject to the anti-discrimination part of the human rights ordinance. I think that same kind of attention to the granularity of these changes could improve it a lot. Like the provision of this article should not apply to, you want to strike other units of government. That's talking about the whole article. So I think if you want to have that in there, we need to specify, maybe break out the city and units of government and say that the provisions of, Article 3, Division 1, 2, 3 will apply to the city, but not, Division 4 or something. But really, it's the public hearing part, right? That's the problem. Everything else in your procedures, Pete, could apply to any complaints against the city until you get to the public hearing. I mean, you could go through the process and have informal conciliation, right?
The problem with informal the problem with everything past the complaint process, not just the hearing, is that the actor responsible for the complaint process is the human rights officer, our currently empty role. So you would have to at least have an independent human rights officer as well, who could do the conciliation. So you'd have to pay for someone to do the conciliation process. You'd have to pay for someone to do the finding a probable cause. So it's not, now I'm scrolling through to figure out where Division 2 is prohibited practices, and that would be fine. It's once you get to Division 3 and Division 4, which is the complaint process and the hearing and administration and enforcement. Division 3 and Division 4 are your problems. Division 2, you could make yourself subject to, but then you'd have to insert someone to actually do the probable cause finding and handle the complaint and all that stuff.
In the proposed language, to try to handle city complaints, you're proposing the commission shall receive any reports by individuals who believe the city of Urbana is engaged in discriminatory practice. The commission shall review such reports and work with the mayor, city council, city departments, agencies, and officials in order to correct any discrimination that may exist. And the commission shall notify the public of the outcome. So that you don't have a problem with the human relations officer handling that process.
No, that's the commission, not the officer. So the commission would directly communicate with the mayor and assorted city staff and everybody else to try and solve the problem.
So would one possible solution or one possible thing to think about be at the end of that process, the commission could decide whether to recommend hiring of a arbitrator or somebody to go further with the process. They could either make a recommendation to hire or not hire, and then the city council could act on that.
That's a possibility. The route that the commission went down with our two choices was trying to minimize changes to the ordinance. And maybe that was not the best choice. You know, I'm the amateur lawyer of the bunch and the rest of them are more amateur than me. So we tried to go for least textual change. So our choices were go down the path you've just described, or go down the path of hire an independent prosecutor, hire independent investigator, and what else did we have include? And an addition of a conflict of interest policy so that people knew how to make the call that no, we have to remove ourselves and go hire external people.
I think I'm leaning toward not going to the extent of hiring the necessary legal people to go through with the hearing, but I think that we could go a little bit farther than what has been proposed. So I'm leaning toward wanting to keep this in committee and examine what other solutions there could be with complaints against the city.
Okay, Jared.
And I would like to see the resolution that the Human Rights Commission passed.
I'm going to defer. I'll take my chance, but I'm going to defer to Eric because he hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Okay. Eric.
Thank you, Jared. So if the city is in the position of prosecuting itself, that would be a clear conflict of interest. That is the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve. And the other examples I can see of government trying to do this are things like inspector generals or ethics commissions, each of which would be independently staffed in order with a clear wall of separation between them and the jurisdiction that they have over the other parts of the government. And if we're going to consider that, then we would have to have cost estimates to go along with it. I would be willing to venture now that those would be prohibitive for the size of city that we are and the budget that we have. That would probably be very expensive. If we went the other route and outsourced it, we'd need to have clarity that if someone, so the idea of having a commission make a recommendation, try to work things out with the city is a nice first thing, right? We can try to help negotiate a solution between one part of the city and the other. But at the end of the day, it's still the city trying to regulate itself, supposedly on behalf of someone who disagrees with the city, right? So it's still a conflict of interest in a way. We can try it, but that can't be the end solution, right? The end solution is there has to be an independent jurisdiction somewhere. And so I'd like to know with clarity that if, you know, the city says we've solved this and the commission says sure, because whatever, the person who disagreed would have remedy in the courts for the city's part of the ordinance that is specific to the city, right? Obviously, they have remedy for the state, things that are covered by the state level. So that is a clarification that I think we would need, and we would need to make clear, right? That there is some remedy. It's not like we're not giving us a get out of jail free card, right? There's no, they can't make a situation where there's no recourse for someone who feels they've been discriminated against. We could go down the route of an arbitrator, but again, who's paying the arbitrator? There's still this issue of it's not necessarily clear that the arbitrator is free to be on the complainant's side. So that would, I think in the end, it has to get back to an independent jurisdiction if we don't create this separate bureaucracy that has a big wall.
Mary Alice, she came after Eric.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, Jared.
Oh, I just want to also make it clear, you know, Eric, or not, I'm sorry, Pete, we would not be here having this conversation right now if we weren't currently trying to resolve this exact problem where the HRC has said that the city is doing something it finds in violation of the HRO ordinance, and the city said, we're not going to change what the HRC found was wrong with what we're doing.
So
right?
Let me correct that, because no, that's not what we found. You have to remember that what the order of things that happened, and preface this by saying, we tried real hard to work out a resolution that was completely independent of the current case that is going on with the commission and the current complainant and respondents. This needed to be solved and has been needed to be solved in other cases for a long time. But what happened in the most recent case was that there was a finding of no jurisdiction and no probable cause. And when that happens, a complainant is allowed, so the commission has not even been part of it up to that point. When the officer, and in this case, it was assigned to the city attorney, when the officer makes a finding of no jurisdiction or no probable cause, the complainant can bring an appeal to the commission, at which point the commission assigns one of their own and two independent citizens to hear only on the questions of jurisdiction and probable cause. That hearing panel found in the most recent case that there was jurisdiction and there was probable cause. So the commission has not heard the case yet. The commission has not decided that there was or was not discrimination. All that's happened is that the panel found that there was probable cause to go forward with an investigation, which would be the next step, and that there was jurisdiction. And the jurisdiction question is the thing that this is addressing.
So there was an appeal and a panel that found jurisdiction.
The appeal panel found jurisdiction and found that there was probable cause for an investigation to move forward.
Right. Okay. So it wasn't the HRC itself. It was the appeal panel.
It was that, and the other correction was that even the appeal panel did not find that there was discrimination. They found that there was probable cause to have a hearing.
Right. And that's where that process is stuck right now.
yeah, and that process has a couple of things going on. Yeah.
So, correct. I would like to get your perspective really quick because I did research into this, and from what I understand is that both the Urbana Human Rights Ordinance and I forget what the name of the ordinance is that the Cook County Commissioners passed some years back, which actually cites our ordinance and their ordinance are the two most liberal of all the ordinances in the state. They're actually more, they have stronger restrictions than even the state law does. Is that also your impression?
I don't know the Cook County one, but yeah, we have one of the most wide-ranging classes of discrimination and approaches to the whole thing that I've seen in any ordinance.
So I want people to understand that it would be a misrepresentation to say that a citizen has an avenue to seek reciprocity of whatever that they see has gone wrong through the state, because the state does not uphold itself to a standard that the city of Urbana has said that it does. So that's a misrepresentation of saying that citizens have recourse to go to the state to get the city to comply with its own ordinance, because our ordinance is more strict than state law is. So I want people to understand that that's clear, and that's why we're having this discussion. And I'm not advocating one way or the other at this point. I feel a certain way about it, but we need to have a discussion about what we need to do. And I'm just upset that it was not presented to us as options. It was, here's what the city thinks we need to do. We're not even really going to get into the other part of what came out of the HRC. And yeah, I'm upset about that. But I think that if there is consensus, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we keep this in committee, because we need to find out what was recommended and have further discussion about this. That's a motion.
Bill Colebrook, we're not finished discussing, apparently.
I just wanted to kind of echo what Eric had said earlier is option 2, we'll call it option 2, sounds really expensive. I don't know that the city has the money to fund that. I don't know if the city should be funding that. It's going to be an independent body. I want to hear where the funds come from. I want to know how the walls are constructed. I want to know, how this complete separate entity would be built. We hear week in, week out of how we're having a hard time getting volunteers for basically, for different commissions and panels. So yet this is another body that we're going to need, people to sit on. And I don't know that the city of Urbana is of the sufficient size to be able to do that. So I would like to see, kind of a comprehensive look at what the solutions are. I'm a little bit ambivalent, I guess, to what you were saying, Jared, about how this was presented to us, because going back to the slide, and I can't remember what the text said completely, but basically it said that if you're a municipal government, you're exempt, and we're a municipal government. So I'm having a hard time figuring out why we're even having the discussion, because it says right then and there that municipal governments are exempt. And so to me, with the way that rule is written, there is only one option right now, because there is no framework for option 2.
Dennis.
Yeah, I think that the text of that you're referring to, Will, is said that no other government, and I think they were talking about federal government or the state government, but not municipal.
No, it said.
It says the political boundaries within the political divisions within the state.
The political divisions within the state. So it's not federal, it's state. Okay. All right. Well, it's kind of hard to really absorb this rather complex problem. I didn't get a chance to even observe or listen to the meeting of the Human Rights Commission to get a sense of where the argument was being made and how that was evolving. It seems like it would be useful to be able to have that information. If it's posted, if that commission meeting is online on our YouTube, our television channel UPTV, it would be something that I would like to watch to get the background of it. I understand it's a couple hours long, but okay. I agree that I'm not ready to vote tonight to take any action right now.
So is there a second that needs to be had in order to keep it into committee?
Well, Jared was kind of prematurely made a motion. Jared, did you want to make the motion?
Sure. I think, Sharice, in parliamentary procedure, I can make a motion when I'm recognized by the chair, and you have to recognize that I've made the motion, but I would like to make the motion that we keep it in committee.
Okay.
I will second that.
Okay. I would have gone around with the motion, Jared, but other people had their hands up. So sorry. That's how it goes. So Jared has made the motion to keep this particular item in committee, and Mary Alice has seconded. Any further discussion or questions? Okay, Ms. Clark, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Sachs,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Mr. Colebrook,
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Okay, this particular resolution it's been decided that it would stay in committee for further discussion and further information. Is what I've gathered from this. With no further business before the committee of the whole, I consider this meeting adjourned.
Night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Night.